Hello, my name is Larissa Kyzer and I'm an Icelandic to English translator. I'm here today in Reykjavik, Iceland, on Sumardagurinn Fyrsti, the first day of summer, which is an official holiday, to read to you from The Fires by Sigríður Hagalín Björnsdóttir. I'm just going to start with a quick author's note because I think it provides some really great context for the book, and then I'm going to read just a brief excerpt from a chapter called Volcanoes Are Boring. This is the author's note. Books often know more than the people who write them. This was one of the most surprising facts I discovered when I began writing, and this book is a prime example. It came out in Iceland in November 2020, 4 months before a volcanic eruption began for real on the Reykjanes Peninsula, just a few kilometers and a mere handful of days apart from the fictional eruption it describes in these pages. I'm not psychic. I was just as surprised about this as everyone else. This book is, however, based on scientific articles and my extensive conversations with geoscientists, who not only shared with me anecdotes from their profession and conjectures about coming volcanic events, but also granted me ready access to new information and research in the lead up to the real eruption. Thus did science blend with fiction, and the story become part of reality. The world is, after all, made of more than stone. And now we're going to jump to the chapter called Volcanoes Are Boring. The eruption ends as quickly as it began, subsides as though a tap has been turned off. The ash plume fades as it sinks, vanishing under the surface of the sea in a matter of mere hours. The ocean breathes gray for a couple of days, spitting lapilli and dead fish onto shore, but the worst is over. The murmurings of volcanic unrest on the screens of the Met Office wane. Police remove barricades and reopen roadways. Reykjanes residents return to their homes throughout the peninsula, begin cleanup by shoveling ash from their roofs, mucking out their gardens, cleaning lapilli from their drains, sighing over flaking paint and broken windows. Disasters become monotonous after a while. It doesn't take long to get used to the end of the world. But the world remains gray. The city is gray, every plant is gray, every blade of withered grass is covered in ash. It clings to the streets, to houses and cars. No matter how many times they're sluiced, it wafts through the air, pulls a veil over the sun, settles in hair and on faces. We draw it into our lungs, wipe it from our eyes, swallow it with our dinners, absorb the grayness and try to endure it. We wait for the spring, for the winds that will blow the ash out to sea, the rains that will wash it into the soil, the fresh green grass that will sprout from it, for the world to become new and clean again. Salka sits by the living room window, drawing in the grime on the windowsill with her finger. I sigh and get a rag to dust the room yet again. I want to go outside and play, she says. I bet Mauni got outside yesterday, and I bet he will today too. I bet Mauni went outside yesterday, I say. You know you can't do that right now. There's still a lot of pollution in the air, and it's bad for your asthma. Your lungs are sensitive. She gives me a sulky look from under her dark bangs. Her lower lip has started to tremble ever so slightly. My lungs are bored. Do you want to invite someone over to play? Shall we call Mauni or Hulta? No. Volcanoes are boring. Eruptions are boring. I recoil. It's like she's kicked me. Sweetheart, why would you say that? They make everything black and ugly, she mumbles with a hangdog expression. You can't go outside and play or anything. I sit on the floor beside her and stroke her hair. You know, eruptions might be a little hard while they're happening, but without them, we wouldn't be here. Everything that is came to being in a volcanic eruption. Everything on Earth. Volcanic eruptions created this island we live on a long, long time ago, and Iceland is still being created in eruptions today. They're the reason we're here, our houses and our streets. Everything is made from the stuff that came out of those ancient eruptions, even the atmosphere around the planet, and without that, there would be no life at all. She traces her finger on the windowsill and then looks at the black smudge on her fingertip. Mom, does this come from the volcano in the ocean? Yes. That's the ash from Kira Josefsson. So the eruption made it all the way here to our house, inside our living room? Yes, you could say that. But it's messing everything up. Volcanoes mess up some things while they're erupting, but they also make new land, new ground. They both destroy things and create new ones, which is why I find them so interesting. Yeah, but you're a little weird, Mommy, she says, and we both start laughing. And that is a brief reading from The Fires by Sigríður Hagalín Björnsdóttir, translated by myself, Larissa Kyzer. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for coming to my reading for the SANT JORDI Festival. My name is Lyn Miller-Lachmann. I am the translator from Portuguese of the hybrid graphic novel, verse novel, Pardalita by Joana Estrela. This is a young adult novel published this month by Levine Querido and is the story of 16-year-old Raquel, who lives in a small town in Portugal today, and who sees from afar an older classmate and becomes obsessed with her, and as a result of that comes to question everything about her life and her future and her sexual orientation. It is a young adult novel, and I will be reading mostly the beginning of it, but there's going to be one passage later that I will also read. Pardalita. I wrote your name on the table without noticing. I was distracted, and my hand formed the letters. But maybe it wasn't really your name. I could have meant the name of any random person, any random bird, an ordinary sparrow. I only knew it was you because this is a small town and everyone is up in each other's business. For instance, the South Wing hall monitor knows my dad is getting married again. For instance, I now know telling the South Wing hall monitor, "How about minding your own business, you piece of shit?" will get a student suspended. There are things I'm still finding out. I was sitting by the guidance office door waiting for my mom to pick me up, and you flew past. Someone behind you called out, "Pardalita, you forgot the paper roll," and you spun around. Your head is in the clouds. Something I would have said if I knew you. Take the paper there, don't forget. I stayed home from school for 2 days. It wasn't bad. My mom and Zay left in the morning, and I had the whole house to myself. That never happens. I didn't do anything different except turn up the music. First English class after returning to school. While I was out, they reviewed irregular verbs. They're verbs that don't follow the pattern for past tense. The teacher gave me a table with all of them and explained, "You're not supposed to understand them, you just have to learn them by heart." She must have noticed my annoyance because she added, "Actually, you're in luck. English doesn't have many irregular verbs. Portuguese is much worse." I doubt I would learn Portuguese unless I was already Portuguese. There's no reason to do it. The only useful word in Portuguese is obrigadinha. You can't translate that. Louisa and I cut each other's hair. 3 fingers. Cut, cut, cut. Irregular verb. The trick is not to wet it first. Mine is a short bob, the way I like it. My dad says I look like a beetle. Yeah. My dad. Every other weekend, I'm with my dad. When I was a little kid, this annoyed him because he wanted to go out and I wrecked his plans. Because I had to be in bed by 10:30, I had nightmares, I made him bring me a glass of water, sit on the bed next to me. Sometimes he brought me to dinner at his friends' houses and put me to bed in some random room. When it was time to leave, he would pick me up and carry my dead weight to the car. I was already too old for him to carry me around, but this was the one exception, and I took full advantage. Like, if I had awakened, I still pretended to be asleep. And I forgave him for leaving me in a stranger's room. Forgive, forgave, forgiven. The problem with short hair is that it grows out super fast. It looks great for 2 weeks and then falls into my eyes. Monstera. I noticed something different when my dad started keeping plants in his apartment. It was 2 years ago, more or less. The first was an Adam's rib plant. Fred said its official name is Monstera deliciosa. The Monstera spread gradually and took up more and more space in the living room. The new leaves emerged, rolled up, and were shiny when they opened. Now they reached the ceiling. After the plant, a jacket appeared, a pair of slippers, a different brand of milk in the fridge, a book that she left behind. I only met her later. And this is the last one I will read, and it's when Raquel joins a theater group that Pardalita is the director or the assistant director of. And, what are the chances that the two of them like each other? Pardalita, I tried to sit as far away from you as possible, but since we were in a circle, the farthest away meant facing you directly. Not the best plan. And I thank you very much for listening. By the way, behind me is a giant Lego town that I've been building since 2007. I hope you have enjoyed watching it or seeing it as you listen. Have a great day.
Hello, I'm Michael Moore, and I'm reading to you from The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni, a historical novel. The novel was published in its final form in 1840 and could be considered the national novel of Italy. It takes place between 1628 and 1630 in the Duchy of Milan, which at the time was a colony of the Spanish Empire. A young couple, Renzo and Lucia, is prevented from marrying and forced to flee their village, becoming, you could say, refugees. In the passage that I'm going to read, Renzo is escaping from Milan, where he has been unjustly accused of starting an uprising, and seeking refuge in the neighboring state of the Republic of Venice, which lies just across the Adda River. When the hammer finally struck 11 times to mark 5 o'clock in the morning, the hour Renzo had chosen to rise, he roused himself, half frozen, knelt down, and said his morning prayers with special fervor. He stood up, stretched high and wide, and shook his hips and his shoulders as if to reconnect his limbs, each of which seemed to have a will of its own. He blew on one hand, then the other, rubbed them together, and opened the door of the hut. Before venturing out, he glanced to the right and the left to see if anyone was around. Finding no one, he looked for the trail from the night before. He spotted it immediately and started off in that direction. The sky promised a beautiful day. Off in a corner, the moon, pale and dim, stood out against an immense gray-blue field that faded slowly to pink and gold farther over to the east. Farther down on the horizon, a few clouds stretched out in long, uneven layers, ranging from blue to brown, the lowest one with a strip of fire along the bottom that slowly became sharper and more vivid. Looking southward, he could see other clouds rolled together, soft and light, glowing in 1,000 nameless colors. The sky above Lombardy, so beautiful when it's beautiful, so splendid, so serene. If Renzo had been out for a stroll, he would certainly have gazed at and admired the dawn, which was so different from what he was used to seeing from his own mountains. But he kept to the path and walked in long strides, to warm up and to get to the river quickly. He crossed the fields, the untilled farmland, the brush. He passed through the woods, looking around, laughing and embarrassed at his panic of a few hours earlier. He reached the top of the riverbank and looked down. Between the branches, he spotted a fisherman's boat moving slowly against the current and brushing against the banks. He immediately raced down the shortest path, cutting through the brambles, and reached the shore. He called out to the fisherman in a soft, low voice. Pretending to ask for a small favor, while unconsciously adopting an almost pleading manner, he gestured to the man to come near. The fisherman surveyed the river, gave a long and cautious look upstream, turned to see what was happening downstream, and then steered the prow toward Renzo and bumped against the riverbank. Renzo, who was standing there with one foot almost in the water, grabbed a hold of the prow, jumped inside the boat, and said, Would you do me the favor of taking me to the other side? I'll pay you." The fisherman had guessed what he wanted and was already rowing in that direction. Renzo, noticing an oar on the floor of the boat, bent down and grabbed hold of it. "Easy there," said the owner. But when he saw how deftly the young man handled it, he said, "Ah, so you're one of us." "You could say that," replied Renzo, and he started to row with the strength and skill of an old hand. Every now and then, without pausing, he would glance suspiciously at the receding bank and impatiently at the one approaching, frustrated that there was no shorter route. The river was too strong at that point for a direct crossing, so the boat had to move diagonally, alternately fighting and following the current. As with every complicated affair in which everything seems difficult at first, but in the doing turns out to be a matter of only a few details, now that the Ada was almost behind him, Renzo was anxious to know for certain whether it was indeed the border between the two states, or whether, having surpassed that obstacle, yet another remained. So he called to the fisherman, and nodding toward the white spot in the distance he had seen the night before, now more distinct, he asked, "That town over there, is it Bergamo?" "The city of Bergamo," the fisherman replied. "And that bank there, is it in the territory of Bergamo?" "In the land of St. Mark." "Long live St. Mark," exclaimed Renzo. The fisherman said nothing. When they finally touched the other side, Renzo leapt to the riverbank. Thanking God under his breath and the fisherman out loud, he stuck his hand in his pocket and pulled out a berlinga that, given the circumstances, was no small expense. He held it out to the honest man who, taking another glance at the Milanese side, up and down the river, extended his hand, accepted the gratuity, and pocketed it. He pursed his lips and placed a finger over them, accompanying this gesture with a complicit wink. Then he said, "Safe trip," and started back across. Lest the reader be surprised at this prompt and discreet courtesy toward a stranger, I hasten to explain that the boatman was often asked to provide a similar service for smugglers and bandits, and was quite accustomed to complying. He did it more to avoid making enemies than for the love of the pocket money he might earn. He provided, I was saying, every time he could be sure that he hadn't been spotted by customs officers, policemen, or spies. So, without preferring one customer to the other, he tried to make everyone happy, with the impartiality that is the innate talent of anyone who is obliged to deal with certain types, while having to account for their actions to certain others. Renzo stopped for a moment to contemplate the land on the opposite bank, which shortly before had burned beneath his feet. "Ah, it really is behind me," was his first thought. "Stay in your own side, damned country," was his second. A farewell to the homeland. But his third went to the people he was leaving behind. He crossed his arms over his chest, heaved a sigh, lowered his eyes to the water flowing at his feet, and thought, "This same water passed under the bridge," the general name by which the people in his village referred to the Lecco Bridge. Ah, what an evil world. Enough of this. God's will be done.
Hello, my name is Marguerite Feitlowitz, and I'll be reading today from Night by the Chilean poet Ennio Moltedo, who was born in 1931 and died in 2012. But before I do, I want to thank Marianne Newman for her invitation, for her stewardship of the Festival SANT JORDI, and to everyone who makes this gathering so extraordinary. Moltes gracias. Ennio Moltedo spent his life in the coastal cities of Valparaíso and Viña del Mar. He is a poet of the sea. One of his books is entitled Concreto Azul, or Concrete Blue, as in the materiality of this color, its waters, its skies, transparency, and mystery. Night, La Noche, was written during and against the Pinochet dictatorship, but not published in Chile until the return of democracy in 1999. For the great Chilean poet Raúl Zurita, who was arrested on the day of the 1973 coup and imprisoned with hundreds of others in the hold of a ship, Moltedo is, and I'll quote, "one of the finest, greatest, most curious and honorable poets of Chile. If he is not better known, it is because poetry far exceeds the times of human lives." Unquote. Raúl Zurita. Moltedo wrote 8 collections of poems, several volumes of prose, as well as art criticism and cultural journalism. His work appears for the first time in English in my translation of Night. I'm grateful to the NEA for supporting this work and to World Poetry Books for publishing the volume. I want to point out that thanks to the design ethos and brilliance of my editor, Matvey Yankelevich, every material in the book is Chilean. The cover image by the great Chilean painter Nemesio Antunes, the typeface and the letters were all created in Chile. Night consists of 113 prose poems, small texts that range from lyric to mini-drama to what Moltedo called microficción, microfiction, and some are all three at once. I'll read some of the poems in both Spanish and English, and others only in English. The poems are entitled with numbers. From Night by Ennio Moltedo. 1. At what time must the birds lined up in gardens, trees, and cages sing? Look to the law. 1. ¿A qué hora deben cantar los pájaros formados en el jardín, en árboles o jaulas? Lea la ley. 2. Let's appoint the village madman, Chief Justice on the Court of Appeals with a vote and veto and seat at the table, a sane example to the debating powers that be and the people who in their hours of contemplation rest in chairs set out on the sidewalk when twilight bloodies the screen with scrolls and pictures to make us believe that, of course, here it is, the disgusting, fleshy finale. Let's appoint the village madman. 7. Definitive sentences do not appear in these pages unless they were previously published in the newspaper of record, as the law decrees and horizons vanish. 10. Si pones el oído sobre la tierra desnuda, escucharás claramente el nombre de los asesinos. 10. If you put your ear to the naked earth, you will precisely hear the murderers' names. 11. Can we go on like this? Wherever one goes, on a walk, to work, to the desert, to the seashore, a hollow, a shelter, any place in the shade, there's a message, a sign at the foot of the column, in official gardens, among trees, even in ponds and underwater currents, in the tunnel, yes, under the bridge, in the office of the district attorney. By all evidence, from every one of our pores, we are birthing the half-dressed dead. Doce. Me han enviado al fondo del mar, sin oxígeno, por supuesto, en traje de calle y con sobre azul en mano. 12. They have sent me to the bottom of the sea, without oxygen, of course, in street clothes, with blue envelope in hand. And this is the title poem. 15. Noche, del latín nocte, este del griego yintes, y este, a su vez, del sánscrito nacta. En alemán se dice Nacht, en inglés night, en italiano notte, en portugués noche, en francés nuit, en catalán nit, en wallon nuit, en Chile la noche es eterna. 15. Noche from the Latin nox, from the Greek nintos, descended in turn from the Sanskrit nacta. In German one says Nacht, in English night, Portuguese noche, in French nuit, in Catalan nit, in Walloon nuit, in Chile night is eternal. 21. Once you've been thrown out and good riddance, you can't go back home. Even when out of sight and out of mind, you set out again as an old man to go back to the place that gave you comfort, the country you called home, because the country you called home has disappeared. 23. It's easy, plowing end to end, slitting the country end to end, back and forth, one furrow next to another, like bleachers in the stadium as seen from the air, their traces sinking ever deeper night and day, until they appear, until we hear their screaming. We're here, my darling, here. 24. El corazón general no late, pero existe. Lo que podemos llamar, en momentos sentimentales, el corazón colectivo no es la suma de los corazones individuales. El corazón general es un artefacto único y quien lo encuentra puede darse por muerto. 24. The general heart doesn't beat, though it exists. What we can call, in sentimental moments, the collective heart is not the sum total of individual hearts. The general heart is a unique artifact, and whoever finds it can consider himself dead. 44. Protect me, God, from pedagogical meaning, and let each day surprise my sight with the breeze that blows in no style past the corner. 49. Good for you, Galileo. You escaped by a hair. Now, in November of 1992, you are officially vindicated. As for our Juan, his case is just getting started. With no papers or proofs, there's no possible hurry, but let's hope it doesn't take 500 years. 51. Please, no, not the full weight of the law. Where do they come from, the flowers that bloom by the wayside and blossom in the Constitution and always face the same direction? Impossible to resist the white boys' legislation. Impossible. So much weight and so much paving over. To tell you the truth, I prefer to sit back and wait for the presidential reckoning, the early and definitive iterations, all the usual music on which, they say, the very air this time of year depends. I prefer a carillon concert or the same old movie shown on the clear channel of the fog. I prefer the story of Hermes, the fascist who in 39 sailed off amid cheers and applause to defend the peninsula, and in 45 was seen returning from the opposite side of the boat on the arm of the enemy. But the whole weight of the law? No, not here. The children are sleeping. Leave something for the moment we pack the truck, for the night of bags and bundles, for our escape, but also for a weekend in the sun with the memory of friends. These things are not to be gambled with. 62. Giving and taking. I hold out to you a certificate of good conduct, and you make your confession. You whisper in my ear where they are to be found. There will be no reports in the press and no discussion in front of the children. All quiet. What is not known does not exist. But you'll be comforted to know that in the future, the surprise can be repeated as many times as may be necessary. As many times as may be necessary. 66. Un esqueleto más y quedaré hablando solo, comprando huesos, tocando la flauta, el tambor, con huesos, presentando materiales, plantaciones, viveros, hasta el día de la cosecha y la gran exportación de tallos y huesos. 66. One more skeleton and I'll be left talking to myself, buying bones, playing the flute, playing the drums with bones, pointing the way to fields, plantations, and nurseries until the day of the harvest and the great exportation of stems and bones. 71. Impossible, Kay, to enter the castle. The castle has no name, no owner, and is always empty. Even so, we must strive for the sky, the realm of the scintillating promise, freedom. Just the last two now. 92. ¿Y qué haremos con todo el amor acumulado en países lejanos? Devolución de cenizas. 92. And what shall we do with all the love accumulated in distant countries? Return the ashes. 113. This is the final poem in the collection and the last poem I'll read right now. 113. Los esperamos en la orilla azul. Vengan de todos los rincones. Vengan traperos, santeras, gitanos, mendicantes, cuenteros, promocionantes, mandaderos, vergonzantes, pedigüeños, etc. El mar los desnuda y se lleva la mugre. 113. We wait for them on the blue shore. Let them come from every corner. Rag sellers, cure sellers, wandering tale tellers, ad runners, errand runners, the shamefaced, the abased, and etc. The sea washes them naked and carries away the slime. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Jaume C. Ponsalorda, and I am very happy to introduce you the Catalan writer Núria Perpinyà, one of our most extraordinary creators here in Europe. In fact, we are here because one of her latest novels, I de sobte el paradís and Suddenly Paradise, has been translated into English by Faye, Lethem, for the publishing house set in Brooklyn, Contra Mundum Press, directed by Raina J. Hanshe. If you want to read an excerpt of this novel, you have the chance, you can do it. You can read in the latest number of the Hyperion magazine devoted to Catalan culture. In this case, with the translation by Salome Monk. As you can see, Núria is showing you the number. Núria, you can show it, of course. Yes, this number of Hyperion, which we recommend you with a lot of enthusiasm. In fact, Contramundum Press has published And Suddenly Paradise, I de sobte el paradís, but it has the interest to publish other books by Núria Perpinyà. In this case, the essay Chaos, Virus, Calma, which will be something like Chaos, Virus, Calm, and the novels Una casa per compondre, here we are, A house to compose, and also Mistana. Mistana doesn't have a translation because it's the name of a village. Or maybe we will see which will be the chosen title of the translator in the future, of course. We have to answer one question. What are we doing here? Now, with this video, we are contributing with our efforts to spread Sant Jordi, St. George, throughout the whole world. The thing is that the 23rd of April is the National Catalan Day, Sant Jordi, St. George. In our case, it is devoted, and it has been for many, many years, to books, to roses, and to love, in the sense that people invade the streets, which are full of bookshops, which are full of publishing houses, which are full of writers publishing the books for everybody, so that everybody can give the most precious gift in the world, which is a book to the most beloved one, together with a rose. This is a tradition, a very Catalan tradition for many, many years. The thing is that we have been invited, Núria Perpinyà and myself, by the North American Catalan Society and by Marianne Newman, so that Núria Perpinyà, who is living in Catalonia, can be heard, can be seen, can be listened to also in the United States. So thank you very much for all your efforts to spread Catalan culture and Catalan passions, not only in New York, but also in the whole United States and in the whole world, of course. For us, it is a great, huge, and epic pleasure to help you make a Catalan tradition, Sant Jordi, St. George, become an international event. In fact, in the latest years, it has been also celebrated in France, in Italy, in Portugal, and now here in North America. First, we take Manhattan, and then we take Berlin. Another question, who is Núria Perpinyà? Núria Perpinyà is a very important professor in the University of Lleida. She's an investigator, writer. As a writer, she has written novels and essays, but also theater. We are going to talk about literary genres later on. The works written by Núria Perpinyà are perfect unions between very, very, very well-planned plots of as many topics as you want. She has written science fiction, she has written drama, she has written thrillers, she has written psychological novel. So she has touched all the possibilities of narrative and of narratology. But at the same time, she does it with a very powerful work of language, which is very poetic and very incredible. So her books are not only interesting in the way she tells stories, but also in the way she writes them all. Perpinyà has won some of the most important prizes here in Catalonia, like the National Prize of the Critics in Narrative, in this case for Miss Tana. Now it's the time that I stop talking, because I love talking, as you can see, but it's the time that we give the chance to talk to the main protagonist of this video, who is Núria Perpinyà.
Hi, Jaume. Jaume himself, he's a very good writer, Jaume Ponsalorda. That means that this is a tour between two writers.
And in my case, I can say that I am very happy to be here because I am a devoted reader of Núria Perpinyà and of all of her books. As you can see, I have a shelf in my bookshelf devoted only to her. And I have shown you only the specific titles that are going to be translated into English. But the thing is that she has published many more books, which are very interesting. The first question, Núria, of course, is going to talk about what you are going to do in Sant Jordi, in St. George. What are you going to do for the Catalan National Day?
Well, today, not much, just to do some work and to see my writer's friend and to read some books. But it's a very nice day, devoted to our books that we love so much, devoted to read and to write. And well, in Sant Jordi we can forget the old story of the old story, medieval story about a knight solving a woman. But this is just well, this is like an old tale. But the thing is, today it's a very good day in honor to our books, in our to literature.
Yes, as you have said, the origin of this celebration is a legendary story in which there is a dragon who captures a princess, and then the princess is saved by a knight, in this case the knight Sant Jordi, St. George. But also we have seen in the latest years that the myth has changed in a feminist way, and it is the princess who saves the knight against the dragon, or it's the princess who chooses to go with the dragon. So it's a tradition that through postmodernity has also changed in a very nice way. Another question, what do you think of this Catalan tradition, which is something very special and something that other cultures try to implement in their own countries? They devoted to books, to roses, and to love. What do you think?
Well, all the things that we can do in favor of literature, I love it. And in favor of love, it's good also. And we can presume that the love to the rose is like the love to the nature. And then it's perfect. Nature, love, books. I think in my life, there is no more things. Huh? It's all together, the three items.
It's an excellent way to express it, Núria. As you can see, Núria has always the perfect words to answer the questions. Now I think that it's a very good moment to talk about something very special, which is the fact of being translated into English. In this case, you are the first Catalan writer who is translated into the publishing house Contramundum Press, and not only one book, also other books, novels and essays. So how do you feel about this incredible possibility of making your work be in such a language like English and being translated and published in Brooklyn, New York, the United States?
Well, I am very happy, because Contramundum Press is a very prestigious publisher, devoted to European literature. And well, I feel very happy because the people that, as Jaume Pons, Alorda, and myself, the Catalan writers and other small culture, the idea of to be translated in a very big spoken language as English is well, it's a great. Well, it could be like historical for us, huh? And especially for me, it's like a how can I say, a miracle, because I had the confidence that someday my books could be translated in the future, huh? Because my books are like my son, my children, and then always we have you want the best for your children. But I thought that this translation will be when I was dead. And for me, it's a miracle that I can see alive that Rainer Hanshe are translating my books. I'm very happy. I'm still not dead.
It's also wonderful because the thing is that we have seen that many books written in Catalan lately have been translated into English. In fact, this week we have had the news that a Catalan book called Balder by Eva Baltasar, translated into English by Julia Sanders in the publishing house and Other Stories, is one of the shortlisted books for the Man Booker Prize International. So in this way, we have seen as Catalan authors who are very important for our culture are getting a lot of knowledge and a lot of acknowledgements throughout the whole world, which is something great. And I am very happy also that you didn't have to wait until your death so that the English-speaking readers are able to read your wonderful book. So it's in fact a great piece of news, and let's hope that this becomes a tradition also, like St. Jordi, like St. George. Now, Núria, I want to talk with you about something specific related to the literary technique, in the sense that as you have written in many different literary genres, you have written novels, you have written essays, you have also written theater. In this case, and I de sobte el Paradís, published in Catalan by el segell Coma Negra, also in Contramundum Press in English, and Suddenly Paradise, is a novel. But how do you know that one book that you are going to write becomes a novel or an essay or theater? How do you choose the literary genre, or is the literary genre that chooses you? How do we deal with this question?
Well, if I have enough money or and sponsor, I would like to do always theater, huh? And to collaborate with many artists, with composer, with actors, painters, and to work together a work of art. But at the moment, I have no such millionaire sponsor, and also I like the novels because you can be more psychological and with more details, and I like also, and because it's the same. I like also to read many novels, and I'm reading now. As you said to me, it is more. It's so good.
Ah, yes.
She's so good. And that's why I love so much the novels, that for me, it's also a dream to be a novelist. Huh? Not as much good as Iris Murdoch, but a novelist, a small novelist. And the essays, when sometimes I have in my mind, I want to be deeper in my ideas or to link ideas, perhaps it's better for me and for the reader to put these ideas in an essay. Yeah.
Wonderful. In fact, for me, it's a surprise. I didn't know that your preferred genre is theater and that you like collaborating with other artists. In the sense, that's a very beautiful idea, because working with other people also helps to make different works of art. So thank you for your sincere answer. In fact, now we can talk about the novel precisely, and Suddenly Paradise. It's a book which talks about a group of people who need to go to a refuge so that they can fight against their addiction to the social networks. It works as a work of science fiction, which for me, if we want to give an example to the English-speaking readers, it would be something like a Black Mirror episode, which is an immediate future in which things explained there can be prophetic, and it can work in a very direct way, in the sense that the social networks control the lives of the main protagonists. In that sense, it's a book, it's a novel, with different main protagonists, with main characters at the same time in different subplots, which talks about two main ideas, which are addictions and social networks. Why did you have the interest of talking about these two topics, Núria?
Well, in my books, I think there is always a passion moving the plot, huh? But in each book, the passion is different. Huh? And in this book, the passion is internet. Huh? And the people are in love in internet, in love with iPhones and in computers, and but at the same time, when the characters are the victims of their passion, the same as a lover that could be a victim of his love, or an alcoholic victim of his alcohol. That is the idea, huh? The idea of the excess, the romantic idea of the excess. Mm-hmm. What we can do with the excess to repress, or what we can do with this? Yes,
absolutely. And something related to excess and to things that overwhelm you in that sense. Mm-hmm. I want to make you a question related to another book by yourself, which is Alvisi, The Vice. In this case, The Vice sets in theater some ideas that you work in the novel, in the sense that they are works written in parallel, almost at the same time. So I wanted to ask you about the division of this very same passion, because you expressed that in a very good idea. Every book of Núria Perpinyà is a passion strongly conquered. How do you divide this great passion into books? On the one hand, Ida Sobta al Paradís as a novel, and on the other, Alvisi, The Vice on the other. How this did happen?
Well, I conceive this book like an experiment. Well, always I try to do some experiment in my books. And in this case, the experiment was an online experiment, a collective online experiment with Twitters, with the tweets in the Twitter. And the theater, in the theater, the experiment is more clear, because in the book is actually both books actually they are written with thousands of tweets of people, and this is a collective anonymous experiment. Well, in my idea was to do something minor, but something similar, to the Odyssey, that in the Odyssey there is a collage of poems. And here in these books about internet is a collage of tweets. But in the theater, the experiment is more clear, because in theater is more aphoristic. It's just the tweets linked. Huh? Well, I choose the tweets, etc., etc. But in the novel, the story is the same, but between the tweets, there is more sentence, mind sentence, and the novel is more psychological. Than you can know more about the characters. Huh?
Absolutely. In fact, how did you start working on the Twitter, in the sense that how did you get the tweets? How did you get the sentence? That you were navigating, you were searching, or please explain us part of the process of this writing.
Well, it was a very hard process during I think five years. I haven't in 2012. I have at that time I haven't no social media, and even I didn't know how Facebook it was or Twitter. I was in my medieval age, and then I start to have some interest. And wow, what is this? All the people are talking about what is Facebook, what is Twitter, and then I start in 2012 to searching, and I all the time in my work was to be in Twitter, looking for and searching for tweets about some with the hashtags, with the subjects that I was interested in. Hashtag anorexia, hashtag love, hashtag politics. Huh? And then I did my research, and I collect thousands of tweets, and I put the tweets in a it was, now there is no exist anymore. Some years ago exists a web that the name was Storyfy, and then I put all the tweets, the collected tweets, and then I choose the best tweets to me, and I put together sewing like a collage. But it was very, very, very complicated, and I was exhausted in the structure, and also I was quite depressed because I sympathize with the victims, and I be myself, because I wanted to be. I wanted to be myself, an internet addicted. And it was so painful, with some anguish. And well, yes, I feel very sad for so many people that they are frustrated by internet and waiting. Well, very sad, huh? Very sad.
I understand you perfectly, Núria. In fact, we are running out of time, and we are talking in the latest minutes, in the sense that we have a very few questions yet for you to answer. A question I want to make to you is that although the process was very painful, it's a novel which is also very funny in some ways, in the sense that you mix the drama, you mix comedy, you mix anecdotes, you mix the profound and deep and beautiful personalities of all of the characters in this incredible network. So it's shown, it's something that characterizes your work, that you make always a mix of genres, a mix of different possibilities in the very same book, which is something always very interesting. In that sense, I want to ask you, did you think of all of this before starting, that you were going to put all this comedy, all this grotesque, all this excess, all this vice at the same time, or it was a result of these investigations in Twitter?
Well, it was a result, because there are people, many people in Twitter that they enjoy to be there. They enjoy to be there, but always in my novels that I try to choose different people in order to put several point of view, different point of view together. But I must to say one thing. Now we are talking by the machine, the computer said to me that this electronic device will be finished in 10 minutes. That perhaps we must do to cut here like one part, and if you want we can do the second part and to join with the people that are talking, are reading and hearing us in a second part.
Perfect, as you wish. So do you think it's the right moment to make the end of the first part?
Perhaps, and we can do the conclusions of the book in a short second time.
So excellent, Núria. Let's do that. We are now in the end of the first part. See you now for the second part.
Okay, thank you.
And suddenly, paradise. Núria Perpinyà. Keys to paradise. At Trutherbot. Sorry, but your password must contain an uppercase letter, a number, a haiku, a gang sign, a hieroglyph, and the blood of a virgin. What's wrong with my head? It's full of holes. I no longer connect ideas, as the doctor says. I have to hurry or they will find me. I don't have time. How could I have forgotten the most important thing for me? Brain, find the password. It was some combination with my name. Is it Electrolexa? I'm a victim of my damned selfishness, and so it pays me not remembering myself. A narcissist on a desert island would take a mirror with her so as not to feel alone. I don't even have a mirror. They took everything from me. I don't know who I am. My brain doesn't move. Wake up! Search memory! What is my password? What's my name? The neurons turn and turn like the stupid rounds of an upload. They turn, they make me dizzy, but they don't upload anything. The chair can't hold me, my neck goes crazy. Stop, you will knock me down. Sit tight. The neurotransmitters are cut off. My head is spinning, the whirlwind music, the notes tumble and tumble. Of genius, nothing. I'm as egotistical as anyone. I think only of myself, that I am not nothing. Autolatry is the childish epidemic of our civilization. The prognosis is always reserved. Twitter is narcissistic. Facebook, exhibitionist. I have all the flaws, like all the hysterics on Tumblr. Please wait. Uploading, it says. I spend my life waiting. Waiting for what? Being asked politely disarms me. I can't rebel against them if they are so kind. I don't want to wait any longer. I can't. My strength is gone. They can appear at any time. They will catch me. I have to turn on the computer. I can't even do the most basic thing in the world when it's not your stupid password. It's mine. I won't get away with it. I won't be able to access the internet. This clinic is a prison dressed in white. Behind the cotton are the bars. I'm scared. The nurse will appear, and when I type my password, since there's almost no coverage, nothing will open. Alexi, Alexa, Elixir, does not work. Error, error. I have to find Lunatic. I can't leave her alone. I don't know where she is. My robots will have run out of batteries so many days without me. Vigora, Trito, Echo, I miss them. They do not emit vulgar farts like primitive, filthy, smelly dogs. My robots keep the same company, but they are smarter and cleaner. We pray for all the Tamagotchis who died today. Mine must hate me. I haven't fed him in years. Every time I reset it, I end up starving it to death until I bring it back to life. Robots simulate thoughts and think. But even though they simulate emotions, they don't feel, my parents tell me. They say I have to deal with humans and not avatars or artificial intelligence. It hurts to feel that the one you love so much feels nothing for you. My stomach hurts like I'm very hot or very hungry. It's the same symptom. That's why you don't eat, because your stomach burns. The body is like that. The bodily signal of hunger and satiety is the same. The digestive system is poorly designed. It's not my fault, but I pay the price. The internet transforms us into terminals, into machines orbiting around great computational clouds. I'm just a mass of bits, my skymobile and myself. Me, and if possible, a little more than I. Pure narcissism. It seems so, but it's quite the opposite. It's not a superiority complex, but much inferiority. I'm not one of the vain ones, but one of the weak ones. If I touch my hair, it's not to comb it, but to pull it out. It's one of the many vices I have. Trichotillomania, Noiska told me it's called. Who wants a maniac? I don't want her either. Today, everything kicks in. My stomach is full of air. I feel sick. My bowels fart. I am well educated. At home, I was taught to suppress them. My robots don't fart. The sound of this word hurts me. Its nightmarish echo reverberates inside me. I wish I could get on the internet and write even a tweet. The keys take me to paradise. If I knew the right letters, I'd get into it. Now I am out, but if I knew the magic word, suddenly, in an instant, I would enter a wonderful world and forget why men don't approach me. I'm a corpse with no breasts and no ass. Their hormones don't go off when I walk close by. Depression changes you. You become another person, an anorexic, an anti-person. Me against me. Always losing. You're a starving artist. That's the only masterpiece that you make. Or study immaterial actions while your head works. Then not even that. You think over the same thing day after day without reaching any conclusions. Your poor thoughts weigh less than a ruminating cow's food bowl. You don't know how to move from one idea to another. Chew and chew. The bridges of reasoning collapse. You regurgitate the same questions. The bowl of ideas is acidic, chaotic. You can't swallow it. I will be thin, and not that much either, but my brain is like that of a cow, gobbling up the same anxiety. Anorexia is a difficult monster to fight. Dangerous. It always destroys. It controls. It is there. A punishment. Always about to drown you. The lump in your throat doesn't let you breathe. You want to be happy. You want to be happy, but as Ennio says, you are addicted to the pleasure of feeling your empty stomach because you are not perfect. You punish yourself by not eating, not going out, by dying. It's the decision you made. I hate food. Why did I have so much breakfast? I have a really bad stomachache now. They don't treat me well. They don't know me. I can't take that much. I don't suffer. The lump goes to the back of my throat. The crap goes up and down. How sour it is. And then when it goes back down, my stomach burns and I can't expel anything. I writhe in pain. I pant. This biological act is repulsive. I prefer not to eat. On the internet, I know who I am. But offline, in real life, no. I tried to live reality. I don't recommend it. My mind is not abnormal. It's the world that's gone astray. I just want to get away from it. But where? It's horrible to want to escape, but at the same time, not want to go anywhere. Listen to music and nothing else. The sound hound is so gorgeous. Identify the pieces with 3 chords. I don't have it anymore. They took everything from me. I don't even look in the mirror to see my ugly self with a face full of fuzz and nose marked by starvation. Loose gums. Lanigan is disgusting. I have a hairy body. It's not enough to be sick. My hair has to grow. No, it's not fuzz. I'm growing a beard. Sometimes it's hard to know which side of the mirror you're on.
Hi, my name is Kira Josefsson. I'm the translator of Genberg's novel The Details, which is forthcoming on HarperVia this August. I'm here to read a short section of that novel. Right when I wanted a hurricane, there was a hurricane. I had longed to be swept away, to get entangled in something. And I had the good luck of getting exactly what I'd asked for. The bad luck of getting everything I thought I wanted. The good luck and the bad luck of having my prayers about passionate love heard. It was not even 4 months before the turn of the millennium, and I was on my belly in bed next to Christian in our apartment in Årsta, listening to the little baby campaign that was the culmination of our lovemaking. He worked as a party secretary in the parliament, where he wrote op-eds, speeches, letters from disgruntled citizens, material for motions, press releases, blog posts for members of parliament, meaning he was a man of campaigns and opinions, his own and other people's shifting opinions. Opinions of the future, opinions people weren't yet aware that they would soon hold. Opinions were the raw material of his craft, the soil from which the words grew. Today, he's the chief information officer at an environmental organization. I sometimes run into him at events. We have mutual acquaintances. But whenever he sees me, he just nods and looks the other way, as if he wants me to know the wound is still there. He was pushing the campaign for a baby, or 2, or 3, or 5, with one hand on my lower back and his nose in my hair, abetted by the fantasies stirred in basically anyone who hears the names of imaginary future children. Dante, Max, Wilmer, Maja, Nelson, Lova, Miranda, Berit, Margareta, Julia, Bastian, Bella, and though it might have looked like a game, Johnny, Conny, Ronny, Sonny, it was, in fact, a version of the lobbyist's smarmy little bowl of candies in the business fair booth, where it's so easy to pause for a moment, let yourself be flattered, start chit-chatting and joking around, let it slip that I love the name Frank above any other, and Billy, which made him laugh out loud. And now the topic was established, and all of a sudden we had a deal. From then on, I felt replaceable, kind of like his opinions, his co-workers, or employers, like a cog or an accessory to the big system that he served so eagerly in his jeans and brand name blazers, and which was comprehensively analyzed in the thick volumes that lined his bookshelves. But by the time that he tattooed my name around his biceps to prove the opposite, I was already on my way out. At that point, I had already had sex with Alejandro in the backseat of a cab from Vaxholm. So in hindsight, it's hard to say which one of us was replaceable in the end. Alejandro hadn't been invited to join Zombie Woof, since he didn't have the requisite competence in any instrument. But legend had it that the night when he impulsively got up on stage and started moving to their music was the first time that the band felt complete. At some point, someone put a tambourine in his hands, but anyone who saw Alejandro on stage immediately forgot about the instrument that he was wielding. He was hypnotizing. You couldn't take your eyes off him, and he moved with such dedication that the word dance doesn't quite do it. It was more like he gave his body to the music, offering physical shape to the rhythm without any detours or stopovers. His movements were the music in a way that I had never experienced myself, and in a way he described after we started dating, with reference to the trips that he'd taken on psychedelics, where he'd realized that sound and matter are basically the same, that music has an architecture and vice versa, and that our senses, as long as we let them intermingle as they wish, are able to tell us much more than we can imagine. It would turn out that he did a lot of drugs, some of which I'd never even heard of before. The first time I saw him was at Fasching. The band was about to start playing when we entered the bar, and he had one foot on an amp as he talked to someone, but he turned his head and watched our group find a table, at which point our eyes met. I was out with Sally and some other people. We'd gone out, simply out, somewhere, anywhere, looking for music and beer, and we'd ended up at this smoky, familiar jazz club situated in between downtown and Kungsholmen. The others left to go elsewhere after an hour or so, including Sally, but I stayed, as if I was physically incapable of moving. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Victoria Caudle, and I am the translator of Dolki Min's Walking Practice from HarperVia. This is a novel translated from Korean, and it is a really unique queer novel that is from the perspective of an alien that has been trapped on Earth for around 15 years. The novel is in the first person, and you can feel and experience exactly what the alien is going through as they try to survive on Earth. So part of the way that they go about surviving on Earth is that they found that what they can survive on is eating human flesh. And so they go through this process of transforming their body and creating perfect, idealized human bodies and using them to attract dates on dating apps and going to those people, having sex with them, enjoying them, and then murdering them and taking the meat home. So today I will be reading a little bit from Walking Practice for you, and then talking a little bit about the process for translating it. The section that I'll be reading from is from the 3rd chapter, when the alien is about to reform itself into a new human body and head out to meet a new date. So it opens with some text chatting over a Tinder or Grindr-like app, and then talks through the process of becoming a new person. I'll read it first in English and then in Korean. Hot bottom. We're meeting tomorrow, right? Hunting for love. Yes, that's right. Hot bottom. Can I see some more pictures? Hunting for love. Sure. Hot bottom. You're just my type. Hunting for love. Thank you. Send me one too. Hot bottom. I'm ugly, aren't I? Hunting for love. Not at all. You look good. Hot bottom. I want to fuck right now. Hunting for love. Me too. Hot bottom. What's your voice sound like? Hunting for love. Very deep. You? Hot bottom. It's not high. Pretty average. Hunting for love. I'm kind of busy right now. I'll message you later. Hot bottom. Of course you are. I'm not bothering you, am I? Hunting for love. You're a nuisance, idiot. I don't have time to be wasting on repeating the same tedious conversation we had before. I only have conversations essential to meeting up with the people I've made dates with. Obviously, I don't hit send. I close the chat window and mess with some other humans. I've got to ask at least one other person, because I don't want to have conversations. No, sometimes I enjoy having conversations with people that I connect with, but have never met in person and who don't look that tasty. Although usually it doesn't last for more than a day before I cut contact. Sometimes they start to feel like an old friend. As long as we keep talking, it feels like I have a friend. The type of friend that you can call up whenever to have a meal. A friend to chat with in a bar who'd say, "Let's go to karaoke," and drag me along. A friend that I've spent so much time with that there's a chance we may become lovers. I find a friend like that once every couple months, but they disappear before the day is through. I confess to them all the worries that I normally don't speak of, and they do the same with me. Sharing my worries with myself is impossible. I already know my worries. I'm not hoping for solutions. I need someone who will listen. No, I'm asking for a person who will steal away my time with good conversation. I'm so busy I could die, but I'm also not the least bit busy, with all the time in the world on my hands. Sometimes I have so much time it sickens me. Please take up my time, not my body, but my time. Time together with me. Steal as much as you like. Just a moment is fine too. It's better if we meet in person. And even better than that, if you don't get creeped out by my true form and back away. Please give me attention. Please give me some love. I'm asking for too much. Forgive me, a formality. But if I were to try and make friends, is there any other way than to split myself in two? But the other half of me is still me. So what's the use in that? Sorry, forgive me. I'll stop. I've got to shut down the screens if I'm going to make it to the rhinoceros's place by 6:15. Now I'll go back to being a woman, because what they want is a woman. No other reason. I prepare to transform myself in front of the mirror, following the manual, the one I've cobbled together on my own. These long years, I start with wide hips, a slender waist, narrow shoulders, and a voluptuous chest. I use beard hair, leg hair, and armpit hair to lengthen the hair on my head. What I craft between my two legs is not a cock and pair of balls, nor is it a set of balls and a pussy, nor is it a pussy with a cock, just a single pink pussy. Things get a bit dicey when you mix all three. It's a problem if it's too big or too small, or if the depth is too deep or too shallow. Whatever it is, what's appropriate is best. I'm not really sure what exactly makes something appropriate, but it's got to be appropriate. For the finale, I deck my face out with a set of well-defined eyes, nose, and lips, and a slim jaw. Finished, like solving a Rubik's Cube. 새끈한 바텀. 저희 내일 만나는 거 맞죠? 헌팅 폴럽. 네, 맞아요. 새끈한 바텀. 혹시 사진 더 볼 수 있어요? 헌팅 폴럽. 네. 새끈한 바텀. 딱 제 스타일이시네요. 헌팅 폴럽. 감사합니다. 님도 하나 더 보여주세요. 새끈한 바텀. 못생겼죠, 저. 헌팅 폴럽. 아니에요. 잘생겼어요. 새끈한 바텀. 얼른 같이 눕고 싶다. 헌팅 폴럽. 나도요. 새끈한 바텀. 님은 목소리가 어떤 편이에요? 헌팅 폴럽. 많이 낮아요. 님은요? 새끈한 바텀. 저는 높진 않아요. 보통이에요. 헌팅 폴럽. 내가 지금 좀 바빠서 이따 메시지해요. 새끈한 바텀. 그러시구나. 방해한 거 아니죠? 헌팅 폴럽. 방해한 거 맞습니다, 새끼야. 저번에 했던 얘기 또 하면서 시시하게 노닥거리고 있을 시간이 없어요. 만나기로 약속한 사람과는 약속 지키기에 비일수적인 대화만 합니다. 이제 채팅창을 끄고 다른 인간들을 건드리고 다닐 것입니다. 한 사람이라도 더 물어와야죠. 대화를 하고 싶은 게 아니니까요. 아니, 가끔 실제로 만나본 적 없지만 되게 먹음직스럽진 않고 말이 잘 통하는 사람과 즐겁게 대화합니다. 길게 얘기해 봐야 하루를 넘기지 못하고 연락이 끊기기 일쑤지만 그들이 오래 사귄 친구처럼 느껴질 때가 있습니다. 대화할 때만큼은 내게 친구가 있는 것 같습니다. 연락하면 언제든 만나서 밥 한 끼를 먹을 수 있는 친구 말입니다. 술집에서 수다 덜다 노래방에 가자고 나를 잡아 긋는 친구요. 많은 시간을 함께 보내다 연인으로 발전할 가능성이 없지 않은 친구. 그런 친구가 한두 달에 한 번쯤 생겼다 하루도 안 돼서 사라집니다. 그에게 말 못할 고민을 덜어 놓곤 하는데 그건 친구 쪽도 마찬가지입니다. 그렇게 밖에 토로할 수 없는 고민이에요. 고민거리는 나 자신과 나눌 순 없습니다. 난 고민을 이미 알고 있잖아요. 해결책을 바라진 않아요. 고민을 들어줄 상대가 필요합니다. 아니, 그저 재미있는 대화로 내 시간을 뺏어줄 사람을요, 구하는 거예요. 나는 바빠 죽겠지만 전혀 바쁘지 않고 여유롭기도 합니다. 때로는 지겹도록 시간이 많아요. 나의 시간을 좀 가져가세요. 몸이 아니라 시간, 나와 함께 있는 시간을 말입니다. 얼마든지 훔쳐가도 좋습니다. 잠깐이라도 괜찮습니다. 나를 직접 만나주면 더 좋고요. 내 본 모습을 보고 또 소름 돋지 않고 뒷걸음치질 않으면 더욱더 좋아요. 나에게 관심을 주세요. 나에게 사랑을 좀 주세요. 아, 너무 많은 것을 바라고 있습니다. 미안합니다. 형식적인 말. 그런데 내가 친구를 만들려면 나를 둘로 쪼개는 방법 말고는 없습니까? 쪼개진 나도 나인데 그게 무슨 소용입니까? 미안합니다. 그만하겠습니다. 18시 15분까지 코뿔소가 사는 집에 가려면 그만 스크린을 꺼야 합니다. 자, 나는 다시 여자가 될 겁니다. 그가 여자를 원하기 때문입니다. 다른 이유는 없습니다. 거울 앞에서 신체 개조를 준비합니다. 기나긴 세월 손수집 대성한 매뉴얼에 따라 넓은 골반과 가는 허리와 좁은 어깨 그리고 풍만한 가슴에서 시작합니다. 수염과 다리털과 겨드랑이 털은 머리카락 길이를 늘리는 데 사용해요. 두 다리 사이에 만들 것은 자질과 불알도 아니고 불알과 보지도 아니고 보지와 자지도 아니고 오로지 핑크 보지 하나뿐입니다. 셋을 섞으면서 곤란합니다. 크기가 너무 크거나 작아도 깊이가 너무 깊거나 야타 도문제이고요. 무엇이든지 적당한 것이 좋습니다. 적당함이 어느 정도인지 잘은 모르겠지만 아무튼 적당해야 합니다. 갸름하고 눈꼬입이 뚜렷한 얼굴로 데미를 장식합니다. 완성. 큐브 퍼즐을 다 맞춘 셈이에요. As you could see from the text that I put on the screen while I was reading, both in English and Korean, you can see that Mumu's words are expanding and contracting on the page. And this is actually something that Dolki uses to show the mental state of the character. Now, in Korean, what's interesting is that words have particles at the end of them to show you what part they are in a sentence. So even though the characters are separated and moved around on the page, it's a little easier to read than you'd expect, because these particles indicate where the word will be ending. So looking at them, you can kind of more easily read this jumbled and expanded text. So one of the difficult things that I found when translating walking practice was, how would I show this in English? Particularly because in English, we don't have these sort of particles that indicate the parts of a sentence. I tried changing it into something like leet speak with alternating capitals and lowercase letters, as well as a couple different iterations of seeing if I could get people to read something that has been expanded across a page without any indication of spaces between the words. However, this is incredibly difficult for English readers to read if you have no spaces indicating where something begins and ends. So what I ended up doing was figuring out a way that I could individually find phrases and expand and contract the spacing between the letters of the text. So this unique spacing emulates the way that the Korean text has the words spaced across the page. However, it is still readable in English. And it's something that we work together with our typesetting team to make sure that the phrases I selected, and whether they are spread wide or contracted together, that they are still there and matching the meaning that I hoped you would feel along with those words. So with the text on the page expressing this alienness, this this illegibility, I found this to mean something of the queer experience that to most people is illegible, unable to be understood by someone who's not living that queer experience, particularly a trans experience, particularly an experience of someone of a non-binary identity, someone who doesn't identify with these arbitrary rules of gender that we have ascribed to people. So walking practice really plays with this idea of gender and how we can express it on the page, how we can interrogate it through our narratives, and how this particular first-person alien character can have readers question what they think about gender and how they express it. The narrator speaks directly to the reader often and challenges them to change their way of thinking and to re-examine their prejudices in their everyday life. This is a really powerful book that, on top of being hilarious and campy and nasty and everything that you would really want in a queer text, it's something that I hope will speak to readers who have experience of queerness, who have experience of disability, have that feeling of not quite fitting in the world. So I really encourage anyone who has any interest in any of these topics to get a copy of Walking Practice and see if you identify with this character. Thank you so much.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. My name is Elena Palla and I am the translator of Sandro Veronese's The Hummingbird. Today I will be reading a short excerpt from this novel, and the excerpt is actually a rewriting of a short story called Il Gorgo, The Whirlpool by Beppe Fenoglio, an Italian author that Veronese greatly admires. So not 10 minutes into this novel, we learn that the protagonist's sister, Irene, dies tragically when she's very young. We are then presented with a series of situations where Irene has a brush with death, and every time we think, here we go, this is it, this is how it happens, this is how Irene dies. And does she? Molinelli, 1974. Irene Carrera chose the Molinelli beach that August evening. And of all the family members, Marco, who was almost 15 but looked 12, was the only one to realize. Irene's turbulent disposition manifested itself in an endless succession of tantrums, acts of rebellion, gloomy silences, and misleading moments of recovery, during which she was given to occasional outbursts of optimism, only to plunge again into sadness and rage. By mid-August, Irene found herself trapped in the same place she'd spent all her summers, that house in Bulgaria she really thought she could escape, now that she had turned 18, passed the driving test, and graduated from school with straight A's. Instead, all it took was a friend bailing on her for her plans to evaporate. So there she was, like every summer, with her hyperactive younger brothers running riot, her father cooking or reading, her mother reading or sunbathing, the boat trips on the old sea-worn dinghy, and her local friends cramming the intolerable local clubs. One of those August evenings then, when the weather had already turned and a southwesterly wind swept the coast, Irene got up after a frugal dinner consisting mostly of leftovers and announced that a storm was brewing, so she was off to the beach to secure the dinghy to the shed. She said that as if it was a normal thing for her to do, but it wasn't. If anything, her father, not Irene, was the one constantly fussing over the dinghy and worrying about keeping it safe. He, however, barely noticed. "Good on you," he replied, then retreated to his room. But Marco immediately saw that Irene was going to off herself in the sea, on that small, lethal stretch of beach by their shed they called Molinelli, where the water eddied around in a whirlpool and the currents pulled you down, even where there were no waves. Since his family had started holidaying in Bulgaria, 4 people had already drowned there. All 4 of them, rumour had it, had been suicides. Irene walked out of the house with an old hemp rope coiled around her shoulder, and Marco watched, dismayed, as neither his mother, who was doing the dishes, nor his brother, who was helping, did anything to stop her. He was terrified, but he knew that it was up to him to save his sister. It was between the 2 of them, he thought, and that thought immediately gave him strength. He made for the French window in the kitchen and slipped out without saying a word. The sky was overcast, heavy with rain, the air hot and sticky. The sea roared in the murky twilight. Marco ran out of the garden and down the path that led to the bottom of the dunes, and in the fading light he caught a glimpse of Irene's white top. He sped up to keep up with her, but Irene had spotted him, and without even turning, shouted at him to go back home. Marco didn't listen. He'd seen him anyway, so he ran even faster. If she hadn't decided to drown herself, at that point Irene would have waited for him, glad to have a brother with her as she secured the boat to the shed. But she wasn't glad. She turned to face him and told him again to go back home, her tone more menacing this time. Again Marco didn't listen. Again he ran even faster. She paused, waiting for him to catch up, and when he finally did, panting by her side and not knowing what to do, she put her hands on his shoulders, spun him round like a bowling pin, and landed a good kick in his buttocks, which took him by surprise and sent him flying to the ground. "Go away!" she shouted, and set off again. She was running now. Marco got back up and ran after her. Even though he was much smaller than her, he'd always been much smaller than everyone, for that matter, he felt strangely energized, enough to stop her from jumping into the sea, enough to pounce on his sister, pin her down if necessary, and hold her down on the sand until she gave up. By the dunes, where the sea roared even louder, Irene stopped again and turned to face him. Marco stopped too, a few steps behind. They were both panting. Irene looked at her brother with a savage grin that frightened him, then started cracking the rope she carried like a whip. Walking backwards, she kept cracking the whip at Marco, who kept following her without losing sight of the rope darting back and forth a few inches from his nose, whisking through the air like a snake. They got to the beach. Irene stopped lashing the air with the rope and stood next to the boat, which was indeed dangerously close to the shore and at the mercy of the rising tide that could easily carry it away. The whirlpools that gave the beach its name were out there, foaming in the dark sea that kept swelling and swelling, stoked by the wind. Irene stopped to look at them, strained like a pointer dog. Marco stood there, catching his breath, ready to pounce on her and anchor her to this world. But Irene stepped aside and hugged the prow, gently stroking the sea-worn plywood. Marco, his muscles still poised, ready to spring, kept looking at her from behind as she secured the rope to the prow and then tied the other end around her hips. He let her hoist the boat up to the shed, walking backwards, without rubber rollers, without a trailer, in spurts, by brute force. He didn't step in, didn't help her. Once the dinghy was safe, Irene unhooked the rope from around her hips and tied it to the shed, then turned toward Marco. As the darkness set in, he looked her in the eye, looked closely, and that devilish grin was gone. They walked back home together, trying to sync their steps so they could hug. Marco clinging to her waist, and Irene with an arm wrapped around his shoulders. Every now and again, she'd scratch between the two nerves down the back of his neck with her thumb, ever so gently, light as a feather. Irene lives another day. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you for joining me today to talk about our translations of books by Tomohiko Morimi. So I think we'd like to start out with you reading from your translation of the Tatami Galaxy, which just came out and was also finalist for the PEN Award, right? So congratulations.
Yeah, the PEN Translation Award. Thanks. So I'm Emily Balistreri. I'm going to read from the Tatami Galaxy by Morimi Tomohiko. In this section, the main character is basically trying to get revenge on a film club that he had to exile himself from and causing lots of trouble. And he's with his friend Ozu, who he kind of can't live with and can't live without. So they're planning a fireworks attack by the river on this party for the film club. On the enemy line, people were starting to get tipsy, and their merry laughter echoed across the delta. Meanwhile, Ozu and I were curled under a demachibashi, getting wary looks from joggers and dog walkers. The clear boundary that had formed over the river between winners and losers threw some oil on the fire of my anger. If it had been a black-haired maiden under the bridge with me, I'd have been willing to endure some huddling in the dark, but it was Ozu. With the party for new club members getting into friendly gear on the opposite bank, why did I have to be cuddling with a guy with a face as sinister as a Taisho-era loan shark? Did I make a mistake somewhere along the way? Was I at fault? I wanted to at least be with someone whose spirit was a bit more kindred, or a black-haired maiden. This makes it really obvious who the winners and losers are, huh? Said Ozu. Shut up. It looks like they're having so much fun. Whose side are you on, anyway? I asked. Maybe this is a lost cause. I want to go drink with the freshies. So you're ditching me? It's not like we made a promise or anything. Weren't you just saying you'd dedicate your body and soul to me? Oh, that was like 1,000,000 years ago. I forgot, Ozu said. You bastard. Why are you looking at me like that? Hey, don't hang all over me, I said. But I'm lonely, and the evening breeze is so cold. You're always lonely. Eek! And then, just to give you a taste of the Japanese, I'll read that conversation in Japanese, because it's funny. これはまた明暗に分けましたね、オズが言った。うるさい。ああ、向こうは楽しそうですな。お前、どっちの味方なんだ。もうこんな実りのないことをやめて、あっちに行こうかな。初々しい新入生たちと一緒に酒飲みたいな。裏切るのか。別に何の約束もしてないでしょ。身も心も俺に捧げたとついさっき言ったじゃないか。そんな昔のことは忘れた。忘れちゃった。てめえ。そんな可愛い目で見ないで。おい、くっつくなよ。だって寂しいんだもの。それに夕風が冷たいの。この寂しがり屋さん。キャー。Silly. And then I'll read you a little bit more. Eventually, imitating senseless lovers' talk wore thin as well, and that emptiness was what finally depleted our stores of patience. Jogasaki wasn't there yet, but there was nothing we could do about that. We decided to send him a cake full of dead arthropods later and content ourselves with raining on the other members' parade tonight. Darkness had begun to occupy the riverbank when we crept out carrying our fireworks. Ozu went down to the river to fill the bucket we had brought with water. Fireworks are meant to be shot into the sky. They must never be taken into one's hands, pointed at people, and used to bomb a friendly new student welcome party on the opposite riverbank. They are very dangerous. Please do not try this at home. Even though we had planned for a surprise attack, just suddenly launching into things wasn't my style. First, I shouted across the river to the enemy camp. Hey, it is I, mumble mumble, and I'm about to take revenge. Do take care to shield your eyes. I scanned the revelers. Many people had turned our way, mouths gaping as if ready to ask, what the heck? If they didn't already know what the heck, I would fill them in. I became indignant. Suddenly, the figure of Akashi sitting on the embankment, hugging her beer bottle, caught my eye. After mouthing the truly apt appraisal dumbass at me, she hastily stood and took shelter beyond the pine trees. The rest of the bunch had not yet grasped the situation, and just sat on their tarps blinking. Once Akashi had evacuated, there was no reason to hold back. I ordered Ozu to fire. After shooting a decent number of fireworks, the plan was to leave the partiers to their shrieking chaos and make a swift getaway, but it seemed that the guys our age wanted, in their fury, to look cool in front of the younger students, so they began crossing the river with no regard for how cold the water was. We panicked. Let's get out of here, I said. Wait, this fuse is still burning. Hurry up already. There's still a bunch left. Leave them. I went to run up to the bridge, but there were people streaming down the embankment. It looked like they meant to make us pay. I recognized the savage voice that screamed, you bastards! Ugh, now Jogasaki shows up? Ozu shouted. What timing? Ozu shrieked and did a 180, slipping past me to run the opposite way. He headed for Kamo-Ohashi at an impressive pace, yelling, sorry, I'm sorry, as he went, without a shred of anything even resembling pride. Jogasaki nearly caught me by the collar, but I brushed him aside, lithe as a panther, and ran after Ozu toward Kamo-Ohashi. When are you guys going to give up these stupid pranks? Jogasaki stood on the bank, scolding us as we ran off. How dare you lecture me, I thought. Maybe take a good hard look at yourself before going off on other people. My anger was so righteous I nearly turned around, but we were outnumbered. Even if we were right, it was clear we'd be defeated by the tyranny of the majority. I had no intention of submitting to such a disgrace. In other words, we were not running away, but making a strategic retreat. Ozu had already made it to Kamo-Ohashi and was rapidly moving out of view. When he needs to make a getaway, he's off like a damn shot. Just as I thought, okay, I need to get over there too, a hot mass hit my back. I groaned. A cheer went up behind me.
Yeah, that's a great scene.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
I love that too, that banter that you read a bit of the Japanese from. Like, it's so characteristic of that book, and like what must have been super challenging to, I would think, to translate.
Honestly, just really fun. I really like the dialogue between the two guys in this book.
Yeah.
Well, and all the characters, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you caught their voices pretty well. Do you want to talk about that passage at all?
I don't really know what else to say about it. I guess it's one of the first. I've been translating Morimi for a long time, just like for my own practice and fun, and eventually thinking maybe I'll get to do this for real someday. And this scene was one of the first ones I did, years and years ago.
Oh, really?
So I've read this passage so many times and reworked it, and so it's kind of near and dear to my heart.
So how has it changed? Like, have you gone back and looked at the early versions you did?
Not as significantly as you might expect. Just I feel like obsessively just checking to make sure I have the Japanese understood correctly and stuff like that. Because when I first started, I wasn't as confident. Even now, I still need help with Japanese sometimes, but as we all do, I suppose. But
Right.
yeah.
As we were just talking about earlier today, right, in various ways, like the place names, his books are just full of so many of the places in Kyoto, and these names of different gods and yokai and all this stuff.
Yeah. The place names, especially all the streets, all the neighborhoods, it's very specific.
Yeah. I like in that, one of the things in that's like a trope throughout the book is the black-haired maiden. That he is kind of like fantasy figure that he's always mentioning, which I found amusing. Okay, let's see, should I go ahead and read?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to read from Fox Tales, which came out last November. It was written or published in 2006, which was, I guess, 2 years before the Tatami Galaxy, right? Was published 2000.
After. I think it was after. It was supposed to be published before.
Okay.
It was supposed to be published right after Tower of the Sun, but it got delayed, and then ended up coming out almost at the same time as The Night is Short, Walk On Girl was released in Japanese.
Okay.
Which I really would have liked to read those two side by side. I guess I kind of did, but because they're completely different in tone, which I guess we'll hear when you read your excerpt. Which story are you going to read from?
I'm going to read from Fox Tales, the first story, which I really love. So just to set the scene a little bit, this is a story that takes place at Yoshida Shrine in Kyoto at the Setsubun Festival. So Setsubun is it's the day before spring equinox, so it's like in early February. And I guess in ancient times, people used to believe that the changing of the seasons was a time when demons and evil spirits came out and caused illness and disaster and things like that. So they would do various things to chase away the demons. Like today, people throw beans, mamemaki. But in the past, people would hang thorny holly and rotting fish over their entryway to their house, I guess, to keep the evil spirits.
Smelly.
And at Yoshida Shrine, they have, it's called Suinashiki, I guess. It's a demon exorcism ceremony that they do on Setsubun, where they have these people dressed up as demons going around and kind of terrorizing the crowd, and then they do an exorcism. So anyway, none of this is explicitly explained in the story, because I think most Japanese readers would know. Just if a horror story was set on Halloween night in America, it's all
right. You don't have to explain what Halloween is.
right. But as the as a foreign reader, a lot of that is going over our heads. So, and let's see. I'll start out. The narrator is this college student who has a part-time job at this little antique shop, curio shop, and he's spending the night there. The owner, this woman who's a bit older than him, lives there at the shop, and she's asked him to spend the night because she's scared about something that happened earlier in the day, or she says she's scared. I'm always a little suspicious of this character, So he's staying there overnight. So I'll get started. I stared at the light bulb hanging above, wrapped in a coarse, unfamiliar yukata, staring up at an unfamiliar ceiling. I remembered staying at my grandparents' house in the countryside as a child. I had trouble falling asleep, so I used to shake my grandmother, who always drifted off before me until she woke. Then she would stay up until I fell asleep. Just knowing someone else was awake was enough to soothe me. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 in the morning. Time seemed to be passing both slowly and quickly, and I felt disoriented. Perhaps I had drifted off a few times without realizing it. Suddenly, I sensed someone nearby and sat up. A figure was standing in the shadows at the base of the stairs to the second floor. I almost cried out before realizing it was Natsume, come down from upstairs. She was wearing white pajamas with a wool shawl around her shoulders. I'm sorry, did I wake you? She whispered. No, I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. Stepping apologetically across my feet, she walked to the kitchen and set a kettle on the stove. I gazed at her back from where I sat in my futon. In the dusky orange shadows, her figure floated faintly like a phantom. A wave of drowsiness overtook me as I listened to the soft clattering of kitchen utensils. Would you like a cup of tea? She asked, turning toward me. The gesture struck me as incredibly alluring. We sat on the tatami mat drinking tea. She smiled, a hint of fear in her expression. I didn't tell you yesterday, she said, but I have another horribly frightening memory related to fox masks. It happened when I was in elementary school. At the time, we lived in the Jodoji district. My family already ran a shop called Horendo, although in a different location. I love the New Year's holiday, but in February it was Setsubun that I looked forward to. Yoshida Shrine holds a grand festival for the occasion, with hordes of people and night stalls as far as the eye can see. It takes place in the coldest part of February, and it often snowed. The festival was always lovely in the snow. I'll never forget the feeling of climbing the hill to the shrine as the snow crunched under my feet and slipping into the lively festival crowd. From this side of Yoshida Hill, you could hardly even tell there was a festival, but as you got closer, the stinging cold air gradually warmed, and at a certain point, everything suddenly became bright, like a light had been switched on. The faces of the people walking down the path looked so delightfully warm and flushed. You'd never have guessed it was winter. Walking among them, caught up in the mood of the festival, my body would become light, and I would begin to feel that even if I didn't move my feet, the crowd would carry me along endlessly. On that day, too, I must have been floating along with that same drunken sensation. I'd already crossed onto the shrine grounds and descended the stone stairs, and I was walking down the long path leading to the shrine amid the river of people. A tall man was walking next to me wearing a fox mask. Because we were at a festival, I didn't find it strange. After we had walked along like that for a little while, the man suddenly turned his face toward me. I'm not sure what it was, but he made a strange, frightening sound like phlegm was caught in his throat, then twisted his neck to look up at the sky. He seemed to be in great pain, but since he was wearing the fox mask, then with his head still twisted, he collapsed onto his back. Shocked, I stood stock still and stared at him as he lay on the ground. He was twitching bizarrely. He seemed to be in anguish, as if still alive he could feel his body was being twisted apart. But the mask he had put on in jest clung to his face and couldn't be removed. Natsume sighed and took a sip of tea. What happened to him? I asked. He died, she answered. I haven't been to the Setsubun festival since. And I can read just a few lines of it in Japanese to give a sense. I have to pull it up on my computer. Hold on a second. Okay. So this is from that same passage. 私が小学校の頃です。当時私たちは浄土寺に住んでいました。その頃もホーレンドという店はあったのですが、今とは違う場所だったのです。私は大晦日やお正月が大好きでしたが、2月の楽しみは節分祭でした。吉田神社の節分祭は盛大で、 どこまでも夜店が並んで、たくさんの人がやってきます。2月の一番冷え込みが厳しい頃で、よく雪が降りました。雪が降った日の節分祭というのはとても素敵だったのです。サクサク雪を踏んで吉田山を越えて、節分祭のにぎわいに潜り込んでいったことが忘れられません。So this scene is later on retold from the perspective of another character in the story, even repeating some of the same exact phrases. And we learn, sorry, this is a spoiler alert. We learn that the man who died is actually Natsume's father. So this is like a really, she doesn't
That little
mention
detail
when she,
that she like
oh,
doesn't seem to remember even almost.
yeah.
Like she totally dissociated from it or something.
Or yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I'm always suspicious of her and her motives and everything she does and her relationship with the narrator. Why, I don't know what her motivation was to leave that out, but later we learned that, and we also learned that that was kind of where she became entangled with Amagi, who's this sinister character in the story, and another character, Sunaga, in this relationship of kind of like trading things. It becomes very dark, and so this is a childhood memory that kind of was very shaped a lot of her later life. But one thing that I think is interesting about it is that we never really know why her father died. Like, was this fox mask really possessed? Or is that just kind of a way that she tries to understand what happened in her past, like a story that she tells to make sense of it? And I think, like, for me, that's like the central theme of the book is like there's no boundary between these kind of myths and stories and spiritual creatures and yokai and what we call the real world. And we never really know if it really is a magical world or it's just people are making it that way through these stories that they tell to each other. So yeah, that's why I like that story and that scene in particular.
Yeah. I feel like in Morimi's books in general, that's kind of like Fox Tales is almost kind of like a microcosm of how he creates like this basically Kyoto that is his own kind of Kyoto distinct from whichever one is like an hour away from here by train, where like there's characters who appear across books and things, whereas like this book too, like there's different stories, but like you'll be like, oh wait, isn't she from this one? And like the protagonists are totally different, but there's weird overlapping, and that's kind of interesting. And the same way too, like in Night is Short, Walk on Girl, there's so many like fantastical elements, and you're like, oh wait, this is Kyoto, right? Like, did he really levitate up to the ceiling? Like what? Like,
Right. And I think it's almost like an older way of being in the world, like where these spirits and gods and everything are just a part of the world in the same way that other people are part of the world. And the city is really inhabited by the ghosts of the past.
Things you can't understand. Yeah.
And like these stories from the characters' own pasts and their own family mysteries and ghosts, but also these kind of cultural ghosts and myths and characters from history, and they're all kind of just like hanging out there in this modern Kyoto, and it's really natural that they're all there and like they all kind of exist, have the same there,
Also, like the festival and my environment being like kind of mysterious and supernatural is like you can kind of get a sense of why that would be if you've ever been to a festival here too. Like just like the other day, I went to at the Mint in Osaka. They have what they call a torinuke for the sakura cherry blossoms, and it's just like walking through like these really. I heard they have like 100 different kinds of cherry blossoms. There's like really impressive. Anyways, I went with this group of people, and at the end, I was like, wait, isn't someone missing? And I was like, there was a guy with like a backpack, right? Wasn't he with us? And the other guy was like, I don't know. Like, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure. Like, I remember him. And then like we went to get yakiniku, and sure enough, like the guy finally shows up and is like, hello. And like, it just reminded me because I'm working on a sample of a Morimi book that's also in his spooky mode, where it's based around like friends becoming separated at a festival like that. Like you just kind of get lost in like.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in this same story, there's more about this festival where you really get the sense that it's like the festival is this liminal place between the spirit world and the present world, or maybe it is even the spirit world where someone could get sucked in and just stay there.
Yeah.
He has to go rescue someone from that world.
Yeah. That too is like. And the fact that, especially that one, since it takes place like on temple grounds, it's like, or shrine grounds, it's even more just like, you don't really know what could happen.
Yeah. So talking more about his Kyoto that he creates, I mean, I feel like we have to mention the Kyoto University and the university students. They are just ever present, as far as I can tell. Like all the narrators of the 4 stories in this book are university students, and then your book, of course, as well.
Yeah, and Kyoto has like a bunch of different universities, but I know Morimi himself went to Kyoto University, and definitely there's Kyoto University vibes for sure.
Yeah. In this book, another thing that it's like it's always raining in Kyoto. I think it's be part of like the spooky Kyoto. It's always night and dark. There's a lot of darkness and there's a lot of rain, and there's like beautiful, amazing descriptions of the rain in the book, like all kinds of different variations on it.
Kyoto is really nice in the rain, though. I have to agree. I remember I went one time and it just poured and I got totally soaked and it was miserable, but Kyoto was beautiful and like really atmospheric and nice.
Yes. So
yeah, I feel like Morimi definitely has these two, I mean, broadly speaking, like these two modes of like the rotten university students having hijinks and romance and their craziness, and then like this super spooky, like more classic kind of almost ghost story vibe. And I remember when I first read Fox Tales too in Japanese, like a really long time ago, I was so just like, what is this even? Like, because I was used to Tower of the Sun and Tatami Galaxy and the crazy college kids. So this like very kind of almost understated, like atmospheric, it's totally different style of writing even.
Yeah.
And when I first read it, I was like, oh, this must be like an outlier. It's just some like weird thing. But then once I got to know him more, I was like, oh wait, no, this is the thing he does. Like I translated a short story called 20th Century Hotel that is very much like a ghost story.
Okay.
And there's another flash fiction I did called Fireworks that is also like a kind of festival story and spooky.
Yeah. To me it feels like this very different voice, a very classic. I know you mentioned him being inspired by like some more contemporary horror writers like Stephen King and but to me I got even like more classic vibes from it, like Edgar Allan Poe something, which was like
I grew up with. Really obsessed with Uchida Hyakken, who is like very much more older classical kind of writing. And when you read Uchida Hyakken, there are some English translations even, and like you're like, oh, I see this immediately. Like
Yeah,
Okay.
so I tried to recreate, or I tried to like capture that in English, which actually was, I think this book was a good fit for me more than some of it, this other mode he
Mhm.
has, because like that voice of Tatami Galaxy is not natural for me at all. I know I would have struggled with it a lot. It's kind of like over the top. It's just like so much packed in there, and it's
Yeah,
real
yeah.
like, casual and contemporary and like just this giant jumble of all this interesting stuff. But whereas this one is much more like classic narrative kind of
Mhm.
storytelling stories,
Yeah.
which I really like connected with, fortunately.
Mm.
Um, so maybe I feel like probably the fact that I translated this one and you translated these other ones maybe like accentuates the difference even more, like because we have
Yeah,
different
that could be.
taste as translators or style, maybe, I think.
Mm.
Um, oops, looks like we are almost out of time.
Mm.
Is there anything else you want to
I
mention?
guess one thing I read, so I don't know, probably not many people can read Japanese, but this book, if you're interested in Morimi, is like the absolute must read for all information regarding him, because he writes about his own books and other people write about his books and they talk to each other, and so anything you want to know. But I was reading what he wrote about foxtails, and he was explaining his spooky mode as kind of this thing he does so he doesn't get auto intoxicated. He said as kind of like a mental hygiene to kind of balance out with his like zany side with the comedy. So he kind of does the comedy and horror to. He said he kind of realized it was the key to having a long career as an author, like making sure you balance
Huh.
voices, I guess, or
Yeah, if you happen to be skilled enough to have like two fully formed voices that have going at the same time,
yeah,
that's convenient, right?
yeah. But I felt like it was really interesting to hear him say that, because it's really easy to notice that he has those modes, but I wouldn't have thought it was such a deliberate kind of practice for him.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I think we better
I
end
guess
this.
that was our alarm, right?
Yes, it was. Thank you for this conversation. It was really interesting to hear your perspective. I wish we could go on.
Hello, I'm Katrina Dodson.
And I'm Flora Thompson-DeVoe.
And we are here to talk about a great Brazilian author named Mário de Andrade. And we have both recently published translations of his work. Macunaíma, which is a 1928 Brazilian modernist classic epic. And it's read in all the schools. No one's ever heard of it here, and I'll talk more about it in a minute.
Yeah, so Macunaíma is from 1928, and this, The Apprentice Tourist, was written in 1927. These are the Amazonian travel diaries of Mário de Andrade making his way up the Great River, as he was in the middle of writing Macunaíma, which he'd written the bulk of it in 1926. I think a lot of people have the impression that, this writer, he went to the Amazon and then discovered it and wrote this novel. And actually, it's much more interesting, the fact that he wrote almost all of it before ever setting foot in these tropical forests. And then this book is sort of about the rude awakening that is his actual encounter with the tropics in their rawest form. So shall we start off with little readings?
Yeah, and I'm going to read a little bit from Macunaíma, and it is the main character. Macunaíma is originally Macunaíma, a demigod from indigenous peoples in the north of Brazil, so in the northern Amazon, the Piman people. And Mário de Andrade read about him in a German ethnologist book called From Roraima to the Orinoco. And so the origins of this book happened in the margins of this German book, of these stories of this trickster hero and his brother as they kind of outsmart one of their enemies, Piaima, this cannibal giant, and they have all kinds of adventures all over Brazil. And in a way, the book has become famous as a patchwork portrait of Brazil, so as a symbol of the nation and its many colliding cultures and races. So the hero is, Macunaíma is ambiguously Black indigenous, and then at one point in the novel, he bathes in this magic water that is left in the footprint of a St. Thomas figure. So it's almost like this baptism. So they leave Sao Paulo and they leave the Amazon, their home, and they go to Sao Paulo, the big financial capital of the South. And so before making it to the South, Macunaíma bathes in this magic water and he turns white, blonde, and blue-eyed. One brother remains quote unquote red, or one brother turns red, and the other brother remains Black. And it's based on an Afro-Brazilian folktale called The Three Races. That's an origin story of these fabled three races of Brazil. So I'm going to read part of the chapter 5, in which the three brothers transform, and then they go to discover this strange big city that they've never, that's not like nothing they've ever seen before. It was the loveliest sight under the sun on that rock. The three brothers, one blonde, one red, another Black, standing up tall and naked. All the creatures of the forest gaped in awe, and the black alligator, the little white-bellied alligator, the great big alligator, the ururau alligator with the big yellow snout, all them gators poked their craggy eyes out the water. In the branches of the yingas, the aningas, the mamoranas, the imbaúbas, the catuaris, growing along the riverbank, the capuchin monkey, the squirrel monkey, the guariba howler, the bugio howler, the spider monkey, the woolly monkey, the bearded saki, the tufted kairara, all the 40 monkeys of Brazil, all of them gaped drooling with envy. And the sabia song thrushes, the sabia sika, the sabia poca, the sabia una, the sabia piranga, the sabia gonga that never shares its food, the ravine sabia, the minor sabia, the orange tree sabia, the gum tree sabia, all were wonderstruck and forgot to finish their warbling, eloquently clamoring on. Macunaíma was furious. He put his hands on his hips and hollered at nature, "Ain't nothing to see here!" And so the natural creatures scattered back to living, and the three brothers went on their way once more. However, they were entering the lands of the Igarapé Chiete, where bourbon coffee reigned, and the traditional currency was no longer cacao, but instead was called coin, contos, clackers, bits, tokens, shillings, 2 pence, 10 cents, 50 bucks, 90 clams, and cash, coppers, pennies, loot, greenbacks, gravy, marbles, moolah, dough, vouchers, peanuts, frogs, smackaroos, and the like, where you couldn't even get a pair of sock garters for 2,000 cacao beans. Macunaíma was very upset. He'd have to bust his tail. Him, the hero. He murmured despondently, just so lazy. He decided to abandon the whole enterprise, heading back to his native lands where he was emperor. But Manape piped up, "Quit being a dope, brother. The whole swamp doesn't go into mourning just because one crab kicks the bucket, damn it. Don't lose heart. I'll handle it." When they got to Sao Paulo, they bagged up some of their treasure to eat, and after trading the rest on the exchange, made out with nearly 80 contos de reis. Manape was a sorcerer. 80 contos wasn't all that much, but the hero thought on it and told his brothers, "Chin up. We'll get by on this. He who holds out for a flawless horse ends up walking." On this pocket change, Macunaíma survived. And one cool evening at sundown, the brothers came upon the mighty city of Sao Paulo, sprawling along the riverbanks of the Igarapé Chiete. First came the shrieks of the imperial parrots bidding the hero farewell. Then off flew the bright dappled flock back up to the forests of the north. The brothers entered a savanna full of palm trees, inajás, uricuris, ubusus, bacabás, mucajás, mirichis, tucumás, sprouting smoke plumes instead of coconuts and fronds. All the stars had come down from the mist-drenched white sky and drifted brooding through the city. Macunaíma remembered to look for sea. Never ever could he forget that one, since the bewitched hammock she'd strung up for playing around had been woven from her very own hair, and this made the weaver unforgettable. Macunaíma searched and searched, but the roads and yards were jam-packed with women so white, so very pale. Oh, Macunaíma moaned. He rubbed up against the women, murmuring sweetly, "Mani, mani, little daughters of Manioc," lost in pleasure amid so much beauty. Finally, he chose 3. He played around with them in a strange hammock planted in the ground, in a maloca taller than Paranaguara Peak. Afterward, on account of how hard that hammock was, he slept across the women's bodies. and the knight sent him back 400 smackaroos. The hero's intellect was downright confounded. He awoke to the roaring of beasts in the streets below, zooming between the formidable Malokas, and that great big devil of a Saguiasu that had carried him to the top of the towering tapiri in which he'd slept. What a world of beasts, what a mess of grunting ogres, demonic mawaris, blaring juruparis, hopping sassis, and fiery boitatas, snaking through alleyways, down subterranean pits, on cables, up hillsides, gouged by huge grottos out of which poured crowds, cheek by jowl, of the whitest of white people, most certainly the sons and daughters of Manioc. The hero's intellect was downright confounded. The women had chuckled as they taught him how that great big Saguiasu wasn't a monkey at all. It was called an elevator, and it was a machine. At daybreak, they taught him how that whole gaggle of peeps, howls, war-whoops, blasts, grunts, thundering roars wasn't any of those at all, but was actually klaxons, bells, whistles, horns, and they were all machines. The pumas weren't pumas. They were called Fords, Hupmobiles, Chevrolets, Dodges, Marmons, and they were machines. The tamanduas, the boitatas, the inajas, all abloom with smoke plumes, were actually trucks, trolleys, streetcars, clocks, traffic lights, neon signs, radios, motorcycles, telephones, chisels, lampposts, chimneys. They were machines, and the whole city was made of machines. The hero took it in silently. Once in a while he trembled. Then he'd go still again, listening, conjecturing, machinating in an awestruck reverie. He was seized with an envious respect for this truly powerful goddess, the renowned Tupin, whom the children of Manioc called Machine, who liked to sing even more than the Mother of Water in a bewildering clamor. So then he figured he'd go play around with the machine, so he'd be emperor of the children of Manioc too. But the three women laughed themselves silly, declaring all that stuff about gods to be a fat old lie. There wasn't any god at all, and no one can play around with the machine because it's deadly. The machine wasn't a god at all. It didn't even possess those distinctive feminine parts the hero liked so much. It was made by men, and set in motion by electricity, by fire, by water, by wind, by smoke, men taking advantage of the forces of nature. But did the alligator believe it? Neither did the hero. He leapt out of bed and in one fell swoop, yes sir, all puffed up with disdain, thrust his left forearm into the crook of his other arm, jerked his right fist vigorously at the three women, and took off. Right then, so they say, he invented that notoriously offensive gesture, the banana. And off he went to live in a boarding house with his brothers. He got thrush in his mouth from that first night of Polistano love. He moaned with pain and wasn't getting any better till Manape nicked the key to a tabernacle for Macunaíma to suck on. The hero sucked and got better again. Manape was a sorcerer. Macunaíma then went a week without eating or playing, just machinating on the no-win battles between the sons of Manioc and the machine. The machine killed men, but it was men who commanded the machine. It dawned on him in amazement that the sons of Manioc were masters with no mystery and no power of the machine, with no mystery, no desire, no satiety, incapable of explaining any misfortunes. It made him nostalgic. Till one night, perched on the terrace of a skyscraper with his brothers, Macunaíma concluded, "The sons of Manioc can't beat the machine, nor can the machine beat them in this battle. It's a draw." He didn't come to any other conclusions, seeing as he still wasn't used to speeches, but throbbing inside him was the foggy notion, foggy indeed, that the machine must be a god that men could never truly master, simply because they hadn't made her into an inexplicable yara, but rather a mere reality of the world. Out of all this brewing confusion, his mind hailed a shining light. The men were machines, and the machines were men. Macunaíma howled with laughter. He realized that he was free once more and felt an enormous satisfaction. He turned Jiguet into a telephone machine and called up some cabarets, ordering fresh lobsters and French girls.
So that's the encounter of the Amazonian hero with the big city, and then we have Mario, our hero from São Paulo. Flashing back to 1927, we have our hero from the great city of the machines of São Paulo encountering the mouth of the Amazon. Yes. So I thought I'd start with that entry, which is pretty early on the trip. On board, May 18th. Morning finds us in the middle of a cane field. So this is what they call the wild green seas. It's a cane field, and there's nothing wild about it. On the contrary, it's a meek servant, a chalaça, and Pedro I mounts on him and does as he sees fit. Frankly irritating. Cud chewing, according, cane sucking, while we're all impatient to see the mouth of the Amazon tomorrow. The mouth of the Amazon. We were all a tremble as we contemplated from the pilot house nature's most famed monument. And I swear unto you that there is nothing so sublime in all the world. 7 kilometers out, the sea was already streaked with brown as the river water advanced. It was a tremendous gargantuan swath dappled with an amphitheater of forested islands so enormous that the littlest one was bigger than Portugal. The surging of the river and the clash of the waters formed tremendous eddies and swells, and the waves broke 7 meters high, raining down foam, 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 pink with the sun's dawning. And so the Pedro I forged on through a blooming shower. It forged on with difficulty, bucking and jumping, lurching over the flanks of baby whales and anacondas from the rainforest that had ventured out this far, led on by the freshwater mirage. As we drew closer, the islands, under the curtains of herons and storks that the wind drew back, were a catalogue of all the vegetable species, and in the fantastic hodgepodge of jequitibas, perobas, pine trees, plane trees, humbled by the vast bulk of the baobab, we could make out the longed-for rubber trees dominating the tangle, with the harvesters hanging from the most audacious branch strips on strips of raw leather to pluck the rubber fruits. The scent of the pau rosa and the macacaporanga breathing from the resin of all the trunks was so inebriating that we swayed, nearly falling out into that big old world of furious water. What eloquence! The birds sang in flight, and the din of the whistling ducks, the flamingos, the macaws, the birds of paradise kept me from hearing the ship's bell calling for dinner. The lady touched me on the arm, and I started. I went with the others, leaving my wept-out thought on the magnificence of that hastily made landscape at whose heart there shone just precisely like a glass eye, the Guaçu wheel, the flooded island of Marajó. So I think that's an interesting counterpoint in that Macunaíma has almost the same difficulty in deciphering the city that Mario has in deciphering the Amazon. It's it's a jumble of symbols and also of expectations and disappointment, because what does Macunaíma expect to get out of the city, and what does Mario expect to? He comes to the conclusion that the Amazon is so grand that it's almost monotonous, and that it's overwhelming for him in a sense that the city is also for Macunaíma.
Right, it's hard to differentiate what's what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we have the same sort of, it's a motif throughout Macunaíma, these sort of floods of words, and you see the sort of the landscape flooding over Mario as he's arriving the Amazon. So I thought I'd read, so that's the beginning of the trip. And I thought I'd read a similar entry, or not a similar entry, but an entry in his journals from closer to the end of the trip when he's more situated in the Amazon and he's able to react to it on a more personal level, I think. So this is July 29th. Going to Marajó. At 5 and plenty, we take the Ernestina across the bay. Around 8, we get on the Tucunaré, a smaller boat, and go down the Arari River. Long stretches and little stops. Santana, Cachoeira, Paraíso with its buffaloes, São Joaquim with its buffaloes. Only Brazilians would have thought to raise not only zebus, but American buffaloes too, a cross between a sheep and a pig. We're finally in another sort of Amazonian landscape. The Arari started out with a little scrubby forest along its banks and a few incomparably charming creekoids. The ingazeiras blanket the banks, leafy and plump, washing their branches in the river water. A few little monkeys fly from branch to branch, the aningas in bloom. Once in a while, the huatzins flying low, seeming to weigh a ton, and an abundance of a purple creeper whose name nobody knows, covering the leafy banks. And the view opens up onto new horizons. Immense fields, intense bright green, with islands of forest off in the distance, standing out clearly, a dark green that divides sky from field. Scales thinks of Scotland. I agree eruditely, half ruffled. This is Marajó, folks. Does Scotland have jacanas too, herons? Does it have this Arari River, which never ends and tapers narrower and narrower, leaving voluptuous impressions on your unbridled senses? Does Scotland have this hellscape of big-eared cattle, these zebus and buffaloes degrading the sublime beauty of these fields? Herons, 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 a vividly pink spoonbill in the air. And finally we go by one perch that wrecks me with feeling. There's no describing it, no imagining it. Thousands of scarlet ibises, pink spoonbills, great white herons, jabirus, maguari storks, white, black, gray in the tall trees on the bright green grass. And when you make a noise on purpose, a shot in the air, Everything flies up in crazy flocks, not fleeing, flying, dancing in the air, reds, pinks, mottled whites, dappled in the bright sun. I fell down onto the deck. People came to see, and it was just that. I fell down. The emotion of it was so powerful that my legs gave out. I fell down. To balance out the poetry of that fall, I remember when I was a boy, rooting at football matches, at one game between my beloved Paulistano and São Paulo Athletic, when the latter scored the goal that stole the championship cup from me. I fell on the ground then. But now I am a man, hewn by experiences and pleasures, and the birdly beauty of Marajó knocked me down to the ground. The others laugh. Dona Olivia finds my tumble exceptionally funny, but I believe her laughter's a bit forced. She'd like to fall down too, in a fit of happiness like she's never known. Her pretty eyes are exquisite today. Boat bills, maguaris, sunbitterns, half scarlet ibis, half moorhen. A varnished alligator makes a run for it and flops into the water. A spoonbill in the middle of 1, 2, 3, 13 jabirus. The cormorant, swimming with its whole body in the water, just its slender neck and little head popping up, turns here, turns there, fleeing from us. But the boat is faster, and it takes off in dripping flight to hide itself far away. Malhada is the place where the cattle gather during the day. There's the Malhada over there. Sportingly flat fields drained of nature. An oriole blackbird, bright yellow and black, another with a scarlet back, black wings and head. A river turtle on a log, it drops into the water, and off in the distance, the smoke from the bush burning off. Stopped at Tuyuyu, where we'll spend the night. It's unbearable. Billions of mosquitoes. For the first time, I can't resist, and I slather myself with that English ointment made from Java citronella. Nice smelling, by the way. I've got clumps of ointment on my face. But the mosquitoes come doggedly at my face, dig through the grease, bite, and die mired in the ointment. It's horrific. Dinner, eggs, and dried duck. It stinks a bit when it's not well prepared, as was the case here. And we sing. We sing all the same, swallowing mosquitoes.
Great, yay.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, we had some prepared questions, but just listening to you read and thinking about two together, there are all of these words that are, they don't come from Portuguese, they come from Tupi, the major indigenous language in Brazil, especially words for flora and fauna and sometimes place names. And there are words, like the Ingazeiras, the Aningas, even Tuyuyu, which is stork, but it's a place name in yours. There was all this language that is not familiar to the average Brazilian, but is known if you are in the Amazon. And I was just thinking about the different challenges of translating multilingual texts and texts where even for the original Brazilian readers, some of the words are illegible. And so, we've been doing a couple of events together in New York, and we've gotten this question, how much do you care about readers and legibility?
Perhaps not quite so bluntly. But,
yeah, I think we care about readers, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about the challenges of navigating Mário de Andrade's language.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, these layers of Mário. What you can see him doing on this trip, which is what he did pretty much constantly, is just listening, and picking up words with his butterfly net. A lot of which he then incorporated back into the manuscript of Macunaíma when he came back.
And he was a poet, an ethnomusicologist, and a musician, so sound, music, very
ears
important.
Always open. But he's at once trying to, he has this project of making written Brazilian Portuguese closer to spoken Brazilian Portuguese. There's a gap that exists today, and it was even wider in his time. So part of it is trying to write like you speak, which can be a radical proposition today. It was much more so then. But another part of it is trying to grasp this multifaceted, multi-headed thing that is spoken Brazilian Portuguese with its interactions with indigenous languages. There's a whole...
And African languages.
And African languages, of course. I was just going to say that, there's this previous chapter, sort of a prologue to the Brazilian Portuguese that we know today, which I think most people in the English-speaking world won't be aware of, which is Língua Geral. There was the Portuguese colonization in Brazil was pretty concentrated on the coasts for a very long time. And then sort of coastal Brazil and the interior of Brazil were basically different linguistic empires for generations and generations. And what was spoken in the interior of Brazil was this common language, literally língua geral, general language, which was an amalgam of Portuguese and various other indigenous languages. And that's left traces in the language to this day.
And mostly Tupi. Yeah,
mostly Tupi, above all Tupi. So that's a presence. It's a presence it's a familiar foreign body, if that makes sense. That Mari sort of exploits to the utmost.
And I think in both of our texts, I mean, it's more exaggerated in Macunaíma, which is a more openly poetic and literary text. There are these lists of words that just, from the floor and fauna, you just kind of get assaulted with all of these words you don't know. And Mario's, he wrote a letter to his first translator who started translating Macunaíma into English. And he said, I want you to transpose everything to the indolence of the American language, except these lists in flora and fauna in indigenous words, even spoken in the English manner, they'll retain their music. And so I think, I wanted that sound, but I think in the challenge of translating Marguerite Andrade is to strike that balance of a kind of foreignizing effect. He wanted Brazilians to feel like foreigners in their own land and not understand everything.
Which is how he felt.
Right. But also feeling very much at home in the language, something very colloquial. So I think both of us have tried to balance that kind of strange part of the language with all these names for animals and places you don't recognize, with a very colloquial kind of American, we're both American, so American, North American vernacular almost.
And then there's, in the question of, how much do we care about the reader? We want to be able to, we care a lot about the reader. And the listeners. No, but there's an exercise that you'll see in both works, which is ways to anchor the meaning while being able to preserve some of the sound. So you do a lot of double barreling, like marimbondo wasp. So with the original, be it Portuguese or indigenous, with the song thrushes in your first example. And we've discussed this a little bit as well, but I felt a stronger pull towards the documentary side of things, because we've got fiction versus nonfiction, even though The Apprentice Tourist is nonfiction in which he's constantly fictionalizing. So he'll make up in the first in his encounter of the Amazon, the ship, I do believe, was not actually riding over anacondas and baby whales, and I can't.
But it felt like it.
I wasn't there. It felt like it. So there's a tall tale spirit that you see in a more extreme form in Macunaíma, but trying to be as close as possible to when he's reporting in a more straightforward way, trying to hew as close as possible to the actual flora and fauna, and not. In some cases, you have to give up a little bit of the sound and the poetry of the sequences, just to be like, this is the kind of bird that he saw.
I think also thinking about the readers, something that brings our work together is that we both seem to specialize in dead canonical authors.
Inadvertently. Yeah.
So my previous book-length translation was the complete stories of Clarice Lispector, and Clarice had, she went from being known among the poets and people familiar with maybe Latin American literature or Ellen Sixtu's feminist critique to being pretty well known now in the literary world since the last 10 years. And then Flora, you translated one of the great Brazilian writers of all time, Machado de Assis, the 19th century master, his book, The Posthumous Memoirs of Brás Cubas. And as you've put it so well, both Clarice Lispector and Machado de Assis were known, not as well known as they should have been.
Yeah, it's sort of the thing of, I think I've heard of them, even if you hadn't read them.
And Marguerite Andrade, who is one of the most famous authors in Brazil, everyone's got to read him in school, is virtually unknown.
Yeah.
So
it's a strange
talk
position.
about, what is it like to face this asymmetry of translating very famous authors in their home country for a public that's never heard of them before.
Yeah, it's something that obviously we dealt with the first, and I try not to come into it with too much indignation, which because the first feeling is indignation of, you all really should. I mean, when I read Machado de Assis for the first time in Portuguese, I was indignant that I hadn't had the opportunity to read him earlier in English. I mean, there were existing translations. It felt, no one made Machado cross my path, and for that I was angry. But I try to come into it with the spirit of, we're also, I mean, there's a temporal question that's more acute with Mario than with Clarice. So I was coming from the 19th century, moving into the 1920s, and you're moving backwards. But thinking about, how to, with canonical works, you're dealing with, not only how did this work impact people when it was published, but how has it continued to affect the rest of Brazilian literature? What's all of the additional baggage that this work has accrued in this time? And you feel that, I mean, at least I felt that, the translation has to sort of pick up everything and try to bring as much of it as possible in the text, but also in the way that you frame it.
Right, you're not just translating the book as it was written, you're translating the accumulated trajectory and interpretation of the book, and trying to think over the course of 100 or more years.
Yeah, trying to think about the ways in which it's bled into other works, and it's like, we've just gotten into this time machine. You can see how this book will revolutionize generations of writers, and trying to leave those possibilities open in translation. I mean, it feels it's strange to be crossing that frontier from canon into not canon, and I don't know. The other side effect of these works being canonical in Brazil is often that people have to read them in high school, and then they don't necessarily develop.
They resent them.
They resent them. That's possible. And so, on the other hand, we're coming into a scenario where no one resents these books because they haven't heard of them, and they can just come into them with an open heart. Which after I got over being mad that I hadn't read Machado de Assis or Mário de Andrade before I learned Portuguese, I became grateful for the chance to just encounter them of my own volition, and to be able to establish this genuine and sort of generous relationship with the work, as opposed to, I have to read this and then I have to write down the themes from this chapter and this is the school that the writer belongs to.
Yeah, and I think, we both come to these authors from a sense of something thrilling happening in their language and what they're doing. And, I don't want the book to feel like homework, but at the same time, I'm very aware of how little context readers outside Brazil know about Brazilian history and culture. And for Clarice Lispector, her work is much more psychological, philosophical. You don't need to know a lot about Brazil to get into her. But with a book like Macunaíma, or even The Apprentice Tourist, there are a lot of notes. And so it's a kind of tug of war between wanting to add framing. I have an afterword, there are notes. John Keane wrote a beautiful introduction, but I felt that for a book like Macunaíma, it was very necessary, even though I wouldn't do that for every work.
Yeah.
But it's like this heavy lifting we have to do, translating from a literature that's not as well known.
In the case of Machado de Assis, I felt that it was very important to bring in a lot of historical context, because there's a lot that you can miss if you don't have that framing. And here, in both of these works, I think the Brazilianness is so much on the surface. I think we went from authors whose Brazilianness was a little camouflaged, or when you add in that layer, it tells you so much more about how radical they're being. And with Mário de Andrade, there's no hiding the Brazil. The Brazil is just, it's there, it's in your face. You have to deal with it.
And I think that's why he's been less well known than these other authors.
Yeah, he doesn't travel as well.
Right.
Yeah.
But we're hoping.
Yeah, no, but now we brought him. We've given him
his way
passports.
To you.
Yeah. And we hope that you enjoy your journey through the Brazil of Mário de Andrade as we have.
Yes, thank you for watching.
Thank you.
I'm Tess Lewis, and I'll be reading from Distant Transit, a collection of poems by Maya Haderlap. Maya Haderlap is an Austrian poet and novelist who writes in both Slovenian and German. Before these poems, I translated her novel Angel of Oblivion, also for Archipelago Books. As part of Austria's Slovene ethnic minority, and heir to the community's complex, often traumatic past, Maja Haderlap uses poetry to explore the burdens of history and the prolonged aftershocks of conflict. In these poems, warm, lavish pastoral passages conceal dark memories, and musings on the way language can create and dissolve borders reveal a deep longing for a sense of home. These poems are a delight to read with their vivid, evocative imagery, for the unexpected connections they make and their supple rhythms. But they also draw necessary attention to the political undertones and overtones of words, and how smaller languages and cultures can fall prey to dominant ones. Geopolitical powers have long drawn boundaries for their own interests, carving up ethnic groups, subsuming them in separate national entities, and usually causing the attrition of minority languages. And yet, as the poems in Distant Transit show, these languages can prove resilient, especially when poets give voice to their dreams. Borderlands. Their borderlines knotted a string of snares and transgressions. In the annals of partition, the boundary was inscribed as victor. In the war, the border strip swung back and forth. Villages went astray, slid to the periphery. Their inhabitants sealed their throats with crude locks, stood watch over the silent crime scenes, which I enter lightheartedly. Often, followed by their eyes, I took the armored path to a neighboring land to hear of earlier days, when a fence still encircled the pastures, and a kindred echo conjoined all the names. Where a road once ran, all traces lost. Everything is margin, and forgetting, and transition. House of Old Languages. Disturbed bees buzz around the corridors of my abandoned language. Birds of passage purge themselves in rooms assailed and reviled, as if they were finally home. Where they'd once been, language kept me in thrall to the world, but left me unsatisfied. Were I to bite through it, I would taste its desolation. I left little behind, even if it was all that remained from the years I'd combed through. Momentous promises piled up behind its porous, atrophied walls, along with that sweet melody that still sang to me of milk and honey, although the destruction was long evident. At last I set out, followed by all I'd left behind. It has reached its destination while I circle without end. On the shore path in the evening light, on which I stood one day, at the end of a summer that broke me open like a small fruit, I was bitter and very tough. A motive light falls on me, a spark from abiding time. The impatience still throws its blossoms into the air like balls. It tumbles down, sinks in the water, and disappears. A grain of light rises, as it had back then, and dies away. The shore path is now built up, shifted, torn out of the meadow and discarded. I, too, have emerged repeatedly as a translation of myself, transferred and rewritten. I appear in a new transcription, although in a similar form. The second of light takes flight, the spark of a time that remains, scatters, and returns. Translation. Is there a zone of darkness between all languages, a black river that swallows words and stories and transforms them? Here sentences must disrobe, begin to roam, learn to swim, not lose the memory that nests in their bodies, a secret nucleus. Will the columbine's blue be a shade of violet when it reaches the other side, and the red bee balm become a pear, cinnamon sweet? Will my tench be missing a fin in the light of the new language? Will it have to learn to crawl or to walk upright? Does language know how to draw another language towards it, or only how to turn the other language away? Can each word, then, risk the transit, believe itself invulnerable, dipped in pitch and hard as steel?
Hi, I'm Bruna Dantas Lobato. I will be reading from my translation of The Words That Remain by Stênio Gardel. It's a novel from Brazil about a man who's learning how to read so that he can read a letter from his lover from his youth. I hope you like it. They'd known each other since they were kids, born in the same community. When they were 17 at a forró dance square, Cícero's eyes, the color of the earth, plowed right through Raimundo. Nice party, huh, Gaudêncio? A lot of pretty girls. Yeah. Raimundo thought Cícero was handsome, with a beauty similar to the one he saw in the girls. A beating heart, blood rushing to the pit of his stomach, stalk planted. Lying in the hammock, wild images in his mind tossed and turned his body. A man's body, both his and Cícero's. Man with woman, because man with man wasn't right, that's what everyone said. A man needs to think women look good. A man who thinks other men look good isn't a real man. But he was a man, and he thought Cícero was handsome. And did Cícero think he was handsome too? He'd come to talk about girls and dance with them, with their hair fragrant with coconut oil, soft breasts, plump thighs. Cícero eagerly held the pretty girls rubbing against his leg, straddling. A few days later, the two of them were out alone, working the land that belonged to Cícero's father. A quick light drizzled, moistened the ground. Raimundo's gaze slipped over to Cícero's body, his bare chest hard, covered in sweat and dust. Landscape that would stir a desire to fly in any caged bird. Caged Raimundo. When Cícero noticed, Raimundo looked away, but the gleam of the scythe soon cut through his patience, and again he ventured another glance at his friend, hoping his mind would decide whether it wanted what his body wanted. What is it, Gaudêncio? And now what? He's going to pick a fight with me, tell the whole town, Raimundo is a... What's with all the staring? Why did you have to go and do that, Raimundo? But he's my friend. He won't say anything. It didn't mean anything anyway, nothing really. He wanted to answer. He didn't answer, but in a way he did. Cícero slowly moved closer, and then even closer, his face only a few inches from Raimundo's. With one hand he grabbed the nape of his neck, from the left taking hold of the lock of white hair there, while he clasped his waist with the other. Raimundo didn't move. He buried himself in those brown eyes, feeling the warmth firing up his body and dilating his veins, not knowing where to put his head, his hands, his feet or his member growing between his thighs. Dirt, saliva, tongues, arms, legs, mouths, hunger, life. They met almost every day. It was risky, always in the bushes. In the bushes, they hid from everyone else while they revealed themselves to each other. Man and man. They got along very well. They liked each other. A good taste, but that left something sour in the back of their minds. It lasted 2 years. What the fuck is going on? Cícero's father caught his son on all fours, clenched his hand into a fist, and knocked him to the ground with a punch. Son Nonato, he's your son. We're friends. I grew up going to your house and Cícero coming to mine. We started to like each other a little while ago. We aren't hurting anybody. You didn't have to hit him like that. Son Nonato, please don't hurt him. He's your son. Get up, Cícero, get up. In the end, Raimundo didn't say any of this. While Cícero wiped the blood from his lip with the back of his hand, Son Nonato yanked his son by the arm. Get up, Cícero, get up. Put on your clothes and go home. Raimundo looked like he was going to help, but then stopped. Son Nonato's face was red, twisted in a grimace. And what about you, huh? You just wait until I tell your father. He's going to beat you to a pulp. Cícero looked back one more time. We shouldn't have been here, out in the open. The shade from the cashew tree is nice, Gaudêncio, but today I want to be in the sun. We took too many chances, that's what happened, staying out here by the river. But at the time we knew it couldn't be any other time. All those days without seeing each other, touching each other, when one body leaned into the other, it was all the yearning from those 10 days, talking. It was the yearning from much longer than that, a whole lifetime of desire in there. all that had passed and that was yet to come, every time we felt that sweet agony inside, saying yes to desire and desire clutching the yes from our bodies, from our heads, from time, and I couldn't wait any longer, and neither could he. We just couldn't. And that was why I came, Cícero. You feel that way too, but you kept going on about having a future, having a wife, a child. You got scared. It scared me too. I had a horrible feeling here inside me, being away from you. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't have just let your fears decide our future. Your words that last time we were out by the cashew tree, and then you left. I came after you, and then what? What will happen now? Your family will find out. My family will find out. If this is already confusing to us, imagine to our fathers. The heartbreak, the anger they will feel. You know what they think of people like that, like the two of us, don't you? They think the worst. Think it's worse than even the disease. Where are my pants? I'll have to talk to my father and say what? And to my mother. There are no words. I got to find the few I got and tell them. They will find out anyway. What else is there to hide? What if we can't be together anymore? It's going to be a fight, and not just with our own heads, but with other people's too, you know. We'll fight if we have to, because nothing can keep us apart anymore. They'll have to literally cut us off, our flesh, to tear us off piece by piece. Raimundo finished getting dressed. The sun was starting to drop from the middle of the day. Before leaving the river bank, he looked at the cross that marked the river and that would mark his life. He headed on home. Thank you.
My name is Elizabeth Laufer, and I'm going to be reading today from Pollak's Arm by Hans van Gogh, which I translated from the German for New Vessel Press. The novel is set on the eve of the Nazi raid of Rome in October of 1943, in which more than 1,000 Roman Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Among them were Ludwig Pollak and his wife and 2 grown children. Pollak was a renowned archaeologist and art dealer in Rome, best known for discovering the missing right arm of the Laocoon group in 1906. Historical documentation shows that the Vatican offered refuge to Ludwig Pollak and his family, an offer the elderly man evidently refused. This novel imagines the conversation between Pollak and the emissary sent to summon him, a German school teacher also sheltering in the Vatican. In the sample I'm going to read, the speech act moves between this messenger as he recounts to the Monsignor what happened the following day, and Pollak as he shares his recollections with the younger man. A number of the collectors he showed around Rome would ask to see the surrounding area as well. I had never done automobile tours before, Pollak said. Looking back now, what first comes to mind is how often we broke down. Even Richard Strauss's vehicle broke down a lot. The technology simply wasn't advanced, isn't that right? I'm certain things are far better today. Technology has a way of improving by leaps and bounds during wartime. That has always been the case. Human fodder has never been in short supply. Those excursions of ours could hardly be considered a tribute to technological progress. As I recall, though, there was something carefree and jolly about them. It was lovely. Lovely weather, too. It's common to think that in hindsight. One tends to think the weather was nicer and people were friendlier when remembering the past. And although it's not true, there is some truth to it. Every memory has its own truth. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. The car trouble was simply part of it. Whatever the issue may have been, it always got fixed in the end. Sometimes we had to wait a while, but it would seem we had the time. Before the war, the last one, that is, Rome was flooded with visitors in spring, Pollak said. Some were pleasant, others less so, the latter in the majority. There is no rose without a thorn, after all. By then, I had long since sworn off hosting visitors who, during their stay, brim over with amiability, only to leave and behave as if they've never met you. Until, mind you, they need something again. The more time passed, the longer he spoke, the more detail he felt he could add without encountering resistance, the calmer he appeared, and the stronger his voice sounded. He was using memories of the past to defer the present. I was swept up in it. The moment he sensed I was about to interrupt one thread, he would start on something new. In a seeming non sequitur, he began telling me about Auguste Rodin. Rodin had come to Rome in the winter of 1914 as a house guest of the renowned collector John Marshall and his wife. He was trying to avoid the imminent occupation of Paris, having endured one siege already in 70-71. He was accompanied by the Duchess de Choiseul, a petite but garrulous and rather unattractive older woman, a benevolent tyrant over the old man, as Pollock put it. Pollock kept delivering jibes I could tell he had repeated many times, though probably not in years. He would then give a little snort, punctuating the flow of his account. In the past, it might have been a laugh. At the time, John Marshall lived opposite Palazzo Zuccari, on the top floor of number 25 Via Gregoriana. D'Annunzio lived in the same building, which commands a spectacular view of the city. Pollack first met Rodin at a dinner hosted by the Marshalls in honor of the famous sculptor. To Pollack's surprise, sitting there was a jovial, squat, indeed one could even say fat, fellow with a fresh face framed by a long white beard. He had warm eyes and didn't behave at all like a bigwig. Bigwig is a word Pollack uses a lot. It signifies a species he has always wrestled with and rebelled against. Saturated with indignation and profound disdain, the word stands for a power imbalance as inappropriate as it is unacceptable. He had clearly expected bigwiggery from such a personage as Rodin, but much as he had been with J.P. Morgan, found himself pleasantly disappointed. Rodin struck me as a friendly, if ponderous bourgeois who had escaped into retirement after putting in his time, Pollack recalled. He spoke very little, by the way, and never about art. I happened upon him several days later. It was morning. He stood alone by the Fontana di Trevi, drawing. He did not take his eyes off the fountain. I didn't dare interrupt, but watched from a distance for a long time, observing the vigorous sweep of his hand as he filled the sketchbook. This has been a reading from Pollack's Arm by Hans van Holte. Thank you very much.
I'm reading from Villa of Delirium by Adrien Goertz, published by New Vessel Press, a glorious romp of a novel set at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries on the French Riviera. The furniture in the library was, to my 20-year-old self, the most beautiful in the whole world. Petromoli, the architect of the villa, designed the pieces as he went along. One day he gave me a couple of sketches for tables, wonderful to behold. It's not easy to furnish an ancient villa. In Greece, apart from caskets, chairs and beds, there was little furniture. Fanny Reinach drew up lists of what she needed, and Theodore amused himself thinking up ideas for them. A dressing table, a chest of drawers, a small desk for keeping up with correspondence where his wife could sit in the morning and reply to invitations, a little bell on the table. He took note of everything. He was making it up as he went along. I sometimes went up to Paris to the Faubourg Saint-Antoine to check on the progress of the furniture which was being made in Louis-François Bettenfeld's workshop. Bettenfeld crafted solid furniture from carefully chosen wood, lemon from Ceylon, wild olive from the Mekong Delta, plum from Australia, tamarind from the Indies. Petromoli wanted inlays of mother-of-pearl, ilex, ivory, subtle touches of mahogany, nothing too elaborate. It was like watching Ariadne's watercolour palette, the way she layered colours, waiting for the flat tints to dry, before dabbing on purples and emeralds in just the right place. Rays of sunlight pierce the curtains and sweep over the furniture, sketching new and unexpected lines, making me think of her delicacy, the way she explained everything to me so that my illustrations would be less dry and precise. To have style is rather easy. To invent a style is more extraordinary. Theodore's directives were straightforward. That requires talent. He knew what he didn't want. He wanted to avoid any variation of neoclassicism, a return to Grecian style as has been practiced for centuries. The warmth and pale wood of Austrian Biedermeier furniture could be kept. The main thing was to forget the Empire style, in spite of its straight lines, and the gracious style of Charles X. He wanted simple forms, occasionally broken up with turned feet, bronze scrolls or huge nails, to give an impression of asceticism and refinement. The furniture in Kerelos is quite unlike any other. It was the kind of furniture that before the First World War people looked for but didn't find. Imposing, solid, practical, comfortable, elegantly crafted. Like the house, measurements were calculated in Athenian cubits and feet. The measurements of the Greeks, there was no question of using meters and centimeters. The most extraordinary pieces in my eyes were the chaises-longue where Theodore liked to lounge and read, the fruit of a guilty romance between the English deck chair and the starkly virile Roman chair portrayed by David in his pre-revolutionary paintings. When several years later I came across Art Deco furniture, I detected a family resemblance to those chairs. As is so often the case, it's by reinventing the past that one catches a glimpse of the future. Cerberus died of old age. Theodore, for whom these daily walks were immensely important, replaced him with a watchdog called Basileus. At last, the villa would be guarded. One might have suspected that on our return from Athos, Theodore wanted to dissuade prowlers and burglars. He did not dare ask Petromoli to design a kennel, even though the architect hadn't forgotten even the most trivial objects for the bathrooms. But those were for humans. It would not have been seemly to ask him to make something for the dog. The caretaker enjoyed the task, nailing together several planks in the shape of a temple with a pediment designed according to the animal's dimensions so that it could lie down comfortably inside. Theodore himself picked up a paintbrush and wrote Basileus, which could mean either the dwelling place of the king or the kennel that belongs to Basileus. This folly, enlivened with small columns, sat proudly beneath the peristyle in front of the entrance to the library. The books were hidden away. Theodore arranged them in wall cabinets, trunks, and behind the curtains in the gallery above the library. It was unthinkable to display modern bindings. He wanted people to imagine scrolls as numerous as those that had been found in the ashes of the volcano at Pompeii, in the Villa of the Papyri. Theodore was a genius. He didn't flaunt quotations like his brother Joseph. He didn't bludgeon other people with his knowledge. Joseph, when he read about a discovery in the Journal des Savants, would cry, "Well now, this is absolutely extraordinary. I shall have to write about it." One day during lunch, Fanny Reinach burst out laughing when she heard this familiar phrase. Joseph didn't understand, but he fell silent.